watching closely.
What's the secret, Max?
Just gotta find something you love to do and then do it for the rest of your life.
I don't want to be a product of my environment. I want my environment to be a product of me.
Hello, and welcome to The Establishing Shot, a podcast where we do deep dives into directors and their filmographies. I am your host, Eli Price, and thank you for joining me for episode 56 of the podcast. We are continuing in our early Spielberg series covering his movies from the 70s and 80s, and we are really nearing the end. I guess this podcast really is kind of only the penitent men will pass.
Yes.
For this one, because we are covering Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, wrapping up that original Indy trilogy. And I have a first-time guest joining me today. Excited to have Christiaan Funkhouser on today. And I'm assuming you don't have to do a German accent for your last name.
No, you don't.
So I didn't.
Thank you.
But it's Christian with two A's,
Yes.
which I've always loved about your name.
It is pretty cool. They thought it was
But,
German
yeah.
because my dad's German, Austrian, obviously. But it turns out it was
Yeah.
Danish. So
Danish. Okay.
I was like,
Close.
but my favorite philosopher, Soren Kierkegaard. So I'll
There you go.
do it. I'll claim it. So we're good. It's fine.
That's awesome. But yeah, Christian is joining us for the first time. Christian, why don't you let the people know a little bit about who you are and what you do, and maybe, I don't know, anything else you want to share about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name's Christian. I met Eli. We went to seminary together down in Nolens, and we have stayed in touch because we both love movies and everything. So
Yes.
I have I've written little novels as a teenager. I've got my little books over there. They're awesome. One of them's about a a T-Rex that eats plants because I love Jurassic Park, and that had a big effect
Very
on
nice.
me. Even though that doesn't have to do with Jurassic Park, it's all good. Anyway, there's dinosaurs, and that was the important thing.
Right.
So I eventually, at some point, partially inspired by some conversations that Eli and I have had, am working on my own kind of review thing to kind of examine things from a Christian perspective, and movies
Okay,
and
yeah.
stories and things like that. So that's my labor of love that I have not finished yet, but eventually we're working, and then I'll have you on, and it'll be great.
Yeah.
But I was a pastor for a little bit. Church politics happened, and so I've been kind of doing my own little thing going around, but that's given me more time to watch movies and to form opinions on them and learn more about how the process goes. I've got a friend of mine who is a director, and we've written screenplays together. So I've been on the front end, well, more of the back of the camera, but I have done a couple hey, we need someone to ring the doorbell and give a pizza to the guy. So I've gotten to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So and doing that has given me, you start to notice things oh, okay, so this guy over here was just told to say this, and this guy was told to walk over here. And it's really interesting to kind of, then you watch movies again from a new point of view, which has been pretty awesome.
Oh, yeah.
But eventually I want to get my PhD and be a Dr. Funkhouser. And I'd love to look at how stories affect how Christians can use pop culture for witnessing and evangelism, and to help get across the story of Jesus through other stories that we have, and find redemption and redeeming all different things. So that's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
sorry.
No, yeah. No, that's really cool. Yeah. I think, stories are kind of the universal language.
Yeah.
And so, I love talking about stories. Obviously, that's kind of what you end up doing when you talk about movies. On this podcast, we talk a lot about the making of it, but then when you start digging in, we end up talking about the story and what impact it has. And
Right.
yeah, I think one of the reasons I just love doing this is because I get to talk about stories. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm glad to have you on.
Thank
And
you.
it
Thank you
is
for having me.
always cool to jump in, to kind of a set of filming
Yeah.
and see like what goes on and what all goes into it. I've been able to do that once or twice with some friends too. So,
Cool.
but yeah, I'm really just a normal guy that likes talking about movies and, reading about them and watching making of documentaries and
Hey,
stuff.
that's
So,
all. That's all you got to do.
hey, yeah. So, and then every once in a while, I'll bring in someone that knows more about that stuff than I do and have them, give better insight than I have into it. So,
It's all good. A lot of it is like,
uh,
oh, wait, this is okay. This needs to happen. Who can do this? Okay, there you go. You do
yeah,
this. Especially like
yeah,
on indie movies, which is not indie, but in non like
yeah.
super high budget professional.
INDIE
Yes.
movies. Yeah. Independent.
Independent films. There you go.
Hi. Quick reminder that you, yes, you, can be a huge help to the production of this show. If you visit establishingshotpod.com/donate, you'll find out how to join the Establishing Shot family through some giving tiers starting as low as $5 a month. You heard that right, only $5 a month. And not only will you be helping me keep the show going, but you'll also get some perks yourself, like early and ad-free episodes, bonus episodes, access to a Discord server where we can chat it up about the show and movies in general, and more. Might even let you choose a movie for me to review for the show. Check out that link in the show notes to learn more. Back to the show.
Yeah. So what I always love to ask my guests what their first experience with our director was. So
Yeah.
what's your earliest Spielberg memory? I'm assuming it might have something to do with Jurassic Park, but that could be wrong. I don't know.
So you were wrong on that one. I realized
there you
it as I was going through stuff. So my family used to live in North Carolina. We would come down for to visit my grandma, and then we'd always stay at my aunt's house. My aunt didn't believe in cable, but she had movies. And the one movie that I always watched was Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Every day
Very cool.
after VBS and
There we
stuff like
go.
that, we would watch through it because it had Nazis and Zeppelins and people in fezzes, which was really cool to me. And I still think fezzes are cool. Tanks, witty banter, and it had Jesus, kind of. Stuff about that. And so it passed the smell test with my aunt. So then I was able to so it was watching that, and I realized after kind of rewatching it for this how that kind of spoiled me in terms of movies, because there's just so much that Indiana Jones and Last Crusade does correctly in terms of stuff. But we'll get into that later. But then my other big memory, I mean, I saw E.T. and that was really cool, but I think my other biggest one that had the most impact was Jurassic Park, because I've always loved dinosaurs. And even I remember seeing it in theaters when it came out, and I didn't know that it was going to be scary, and it was, especially to me as a kid. But like, it had such an indelible thing. I went to Universal Studios when I was like 10, 15 years ago, and they had a thing of the main raptor, and I would not turn my back to it at all. It's just something innate within my person. I could not turn my back to it because I did not trust it. And I even felt very nervous, like going up there, go ahead and you can touch it. I'm not touching that thing. It's going to bite my hand off. It's waiting. I know it is. But then even as an adult, like, it just left that much of an impression. Just because it was done like so well. And anyway, that's Jurassic Park. This is Last Crusade. There is he has a way of doing things and of getting the right actors and getting the right thing, and just the cinematography that he directs with, just he doesn't have to tell everything. Anyway, so he's brilliant. I like him.
Yeah. I actually heard someone recently kind of talk about how Spielberg movies are so kind of universally impactful, partly because at the end of the day, there's not like something about his movies that's like where you're like, um, I guess the best way to put it is maybe he doesn't like impress himself upon his films like some directors do.
Yes.
Like some directors, you watch it and you're like, oh yeah, that's a Tim Burton movie,
Right.
or we were talking about Aronofsky, and he kind of has that a little bit. You're like, oh, this must be an Aronofsky movie. It's they have a certain like feel. David Fincher's kind of like that. You're like, oh, it's a Fincher movie.
Yeah.
But Spielberg's, like, you can kind of be like, this feels like a Spielberg movie, but it's almost like any movie that's just like grand and shot really well. You're like, oh, this feels like Spielberg. And it's
Right.
just because like he has like, he kind of taps into that universal like language of film in a
Yes.
way that's like very, I don't know, unique, especially amongst his peers. Like, I mean, you have like Scorsese and De Palma and Lucas and all those guys, and Spielberg kind of stands out in that way of the like all great directors.
Yeah.
But it just kind of like that universal appeal to his movies is really interesting, I think.
And I think you kind of hit I don't want to say, but you hit the nail on the head in the sense that like it's because he doesn't impress himself on it. So
Right.
okay, this is a high quality movie, all this kind of stuff, and it's you kind of just like lean. Oh, okay, well, it doesn't. It's so I don't. Oh man, what is it? It's almost like when you're cooking and you have like an avocado. An avocado doesn't have like a taste, but it's that very like palate cleansing, clean, fresh type taste without being too much. And so it's kind of like, oh,
that makes everything else work even better.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things he brings to it. Which can be a downside to some, like with Aronofsky, you can definitely tell when it's an Aronofsky film, or M. Night Shyamalan, you can always tell. And so then you start to look for that. And then when they don't live up to what they did previously before that was so good, you're like, okay, well, that was a terrible movie. Whereas with Spielberg, since he's just, and that's not to diminish what he does, it's that he does it so well that he doesn't have to impress himself upon it. And so I think, and that allows us to, yes, we can compare like Last Crusade to Temple of Doom, but we can't really compare Last Crusade to like Jurassic Park or Jaws because it is so like fresh and different and new. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, let's jump into Last Crusade. I'm glad to hear that it's like your first Spielberg memory. That's really cool. But yeah, let's talk about it. So, he's coming off, Spielberg at this point in his career is coming off of, it's like he's still kind of in that peak high of his 80s sort of, but he's really like possibly like starting to fall off of that with his last two movies. So The Color Purple and The Color Purple did fine commercially, not like fantastic, but kind of had like a critical disinterest. It had some controversy around it, but really like a disinterest amongst critics. And then Empire of the Sun was really just kind of like a commercial flop for a Spielberg movie. And so he's coming off of those two movies. And those are more serious movies, more, Empire of the Sun centers around a child, but it's a more mature movie, in its content than.
Is that the one with Bruce Willis?
That is the one with Christian Bale as a kid.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Empire, and he's a kid in Shanghai during World War II when Japan invades. So that one.
Okay.
It's kind of in the war. You've got some more mature, stuff going on, but he kind of puts a pause a little bit on those quote unquote adult ambitions, those more mature films, and jumps back into the well of Indiana Jones. He also kind of still had a bad taste in his mouth from Temple of Doom, which we talked about on that episode, that he still kind of like wasn't happy with how that turned out.
Neither was I. So that's two of us.
That's fair. I did appreciate it more, as I talked about in that episode with this watch through. But yeah, I still think it's the worst of them, in my opinion. But yeah. So this maybe is a little bit of an apology for Temple of Doom too. Because as we'll see and talk about, it really like harkens back a lot to Raiders.
Yeah.
But before they got the story that we ended up with, there were a lot of story ideas for this one. They went through a lot of work honing in on what they were going to do. Lucas wanted to do like a haunted Scottish castle, which was kind of rejected for the last Indy movie. And he even commissioned this screenwriter, Diane Thomas, who had done Romancing the Stone in '84. And I guess she probably worked on it, but she passed away in '85. So I don't even know if she finished that script. But it turns out Spielberg did not want to do that anyways.
Yeah.
And so he I think he is just like, he had done Poltergeist, which he like semi-directed, not in credit, but you know, the lore is that he did a decent amount of directing on that as the producer. But yeah, so he had, he'd done his haunted house movie, really.
Yeah.
It was his story. He had done it. He didn't want to do the Scottish haunted castle. So
that doesn't even, and I would agree with him in that, because there was a Scottish haunted castle type thing.
Right.
Well, not really Scottish, but anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, that doesn't seem very Indiana Jonesy to me.
Yeah. Well, what's funny is we talked about on the Temple of Doom episode that one of the original scripts for that movie had him discovering this like hidden land with dinosaurs in it.
Oh my.
And that would be, and I was saying at first, I was like, why would that be an Indiana Jones movie? Yeah. But then like the more I thought about it, the more I was like, I guess like pretty much everything Indiana Jones like encounters is pretty like mystical and strange. Yeah, so I mean, like, it's kind of like why, but also like, I guess why not?
Yeah.
Like, but yeah, Lucas was obsessed with A Quest for the Holy Grail. He like loved the myths around it, the like lore, really loved it. And Spielberg did not really want to do the Holy Grail thing. He felt like it was too much of an esoteric biblical reference. Just wasn't that into it. So Lucas was like, well, okay. He brought in Chris Columbus. Chris Columbus had worked with Spielberg and Amblin. He was one of the co-writers on 1941. But then he also did some Amblin work with like Gremlins, Goonies, Back to the Future. So yeah, they commissioned him. He was working on a script with this Chinese legend of the half man, half ape Monkey King. And Spielberg and Lucas kind of decided they were a little bit wary of the racism critiques after Temple of Doom. So they're like, well, you know what? Let's do Nazis.
Yes.
Everybody hates Nazis. They're the universal bad guys. Let's make Nazis the bad guys.
And it made sense with the with Raiders of the Lost Ark, and he's in that time period, and it's a good time period, right? So it just makes sense.
Let's jump back to the Nazis. So, and I don't think Spielberg really cared for the Columbus scripts.
Yeah.
On top of that, I don't think he didn't have anything against Chris Columbus. He was kind of one of his proteges. I just think he wasn't going for the stories.
Yeah.
But Lucas was stuck on the Holy Grail and immortality, and Spielberg was like, not only like was like, is it too esoteric? he also like associated it with the lunacy of Monty Python and the Holy Grail, which is fair. And so he really like needed another layer of interpretation with it. And as they were working on story, it's unclear who first had the idea to include his father. It was like maybe Harrison Ford or maybe Spielberg, maybe somebody else. I don't know, but he liked that idea. And on top of that, Lucas kind of was like, okay, Lucas really used Joseph Campbell's like hero's journey, from The Hero with a Thousand Faces, the kind of classic
the mono
work. Lucas says that he like models a lot of his writing off of that. You can see it with Luke and Vader, but probably most clearly. And so he kind of liked that idea too. So they had Holy Grail. Spielberg, I guess, relented on the Holy Grail eventually. And they got Holy Grail, they've got a father-son relationship, but then they like couldn't agree on who should write the script.
And I will say, so, the father and son thing, and I think we get to that a little bit later on, but that just makes it made it just an overarching story thing, with the fact that you've got the dad was searching for it, and then the son was able to kind of work with it to happen. But then also how you got to kind of see how the father shaped the son, but then as well with how different they approach things. And that, I think, gave them a lot of also good parts for comedic stuff, but also it gave them, it wasn't just about, let's go find the Holy Grail, as opposed to let's go find the Ark of the Covenant. It was, there's other parts of the story going along well. And I think that might have been, of course, we don't know for sure, but that might have, unless anyone knows Spielberg, you can let us know. Unless that might have been like part of what it was. Like, okay, it's not just about the Holy Grail. It's about the son finding the father, and then, oh, by the way, the Holy Grail exists, type thing.
Right. Yeah, and that was part of like when they were working on the story. From what I could gather with my research, that was one of the. It was sort of something like that. It was Spielberg like, okay, if we're gonna do the Holy Grail, like let's work in like, let's use it, but let's not make it like the main focus.
Yeah.
Let's focus on this relationship, and we'll definitely like dig into that later, even deeper. But yeah, they had to obviously get someone to write the script. Spielberg didn't really trust himself writing scripts, so he didn't let himself write scripts. He always Menno Meyjes worked on the story with them. I think he worked a little bit on script at first. He had done work with Spielberg in his Amazing Stories series. He worked with him on Empire of the Sun. So he joined on. I think he might have a story credit. I don't remember. But then they brought in Jeffrey Boehm, who had done a movie with Joe Dante called Inner Space in '87. So Jeffrey Boehm writes a script, and he's the one, I'm pretty sure, that has like the screenplay credit in like the credit roll. And so I guess he like writes the bulk of the script, or at least like the skeleton of it. And then Spielberg brings on Tom Stoppard, who really like was the main writer of Empire of the Sun. He brings him back. He had like really like gelled with Stoppard.
Yeah.
And so Stoppard actually like is the one who had probably the most vital contributions to the story. He really he kind of like trimmed the fat, as they say, cut out like superfluous stuff. It's like scenes they didn't need, stuff like that. He's the one that changed Kazim from a Nazi collaborator to a member of this Brotherhood of the Cruciform Sword.
Ah, interesting.
And then, because I think he was originally just kind of like collaborating with the Nazis. Yeah. And then he's the one that kind of like adds the real rhythm to it. Probably that has something to do with like trimming the fat, to keep the rhythm going. He sharpens the gag and the dialogue, and he's like Spielberg, I think, even credits him with like basically writing all the father-son dialogue stuff.
He did great.
So yes. So Tom Stoppard really had it. Jeffrey Boehm gets the writing credit, but Stoppard is probably the real hero behind the writing here, which
it's interesting.
Man, you've got to love a good script. I feel like this is a really good script.
Yes.
For this movie.
Menno has story credits on IMDb with Lucas, but Stoppard is not in there in the writing credits.
He's not.
Which is so sad since he did I guess he's probably somewhere in the editing, but anyway, sorry.
Yeah, I think I mentioned on the Empire of the Sun episode that Stoppard kind of became Amblin Entertainment's like script doctor. So for a while, so he was like doctoring a lot of the scripts, but not those kind of guys like don't really get writing credits. They're just like taking the scripts and making them better. I feel like they should. I don't know.
Get something.
There's like, I don't know what the rules are for all that, but I know there are like stipulations and stuff that they have to go by, as far as who gets credit and who doesn't. But yeah, it is what it is. But yeah, I mean, really with this story, they also just kind of return to their roots. There's a lot of callbacks to Raiders. There's a lot of very Raiders feeling, like action and set pieces, and I mean you have the Nazis. There's even like Howard Hawks movies were a big influence on the original story and character, and so the father-son duo kind of feels more like a Howard Hawks movie. You're bringing back Salah and Marcus Brody. So yeah, they're really just like, hey, we did Temple of Doom. You know, some people liked it, some people didn't. Let's go back to the hits. This
one worked.
Right.
Right.
But yeah, so they get to work on it. The opening Western pastiche, I guess you could say, was originally intended to be a simple action scene. This is probably like the last thing on the script. They just wanted to do kind of like homage to John Ford, which was a big influence on Spielberg. You can see it in a lot of his movies with like wide shots of like desert and silhouettes and stuff. So, but they end up adding on. Lucas like basically wants to add in the young Indy stuff, and Spielberg was like hesitant at first to add that stuff. He had just come off of doing a lot of movies with kids in it, and I think he was kind of like wanting to move on from that maybe. But he relents, and I'm glad he did. They add that into the story at the very beginning, and
I felt it worked.
Yeah, it did. We'll definitely talk about that more in a minute for sure when we start talking about River Phoenix and everything. But yeah, the other like interesting thing about this movie, which I maybe should have had earlier in the notes, but Spielberg actually had been working on the movie Rain Man with Dustin Hoffman and Tom Cruise. He had been working on that for like a couple of months or so, and he abandoned that movie, and Barry Levinson ended up taking it on. But it won big at the '89 Oscars. And like Spielberg has up to this point like not won an Oscar himself. Other people in his movies have won Oscars, so it's kind of like, did Spielberg miss out on his opportunity to finally get recognized with an Oscar by dropping Rain Man? But he chose. He had some recent box office like kind of like dull moments, and he's like, let's get another big hit, and wanted to do the crowd pleaser. And yeah, from what he says too, this turned out to be like one of his most enjoyable filming experiences. So probably for him and his life and where he was, it was probably a good decision to do this movie instead of doing another like adult drama. But
and I think he was able to do a pretty good balance of Because nowadays you get fan service, especially with like a lot of the Marvel movies or whatever, and it's like, okay, we know what you're doing there. It's not just that let's go back to what worked and let's tell a story people want to hear. It is like, oh look, member berries. Oh look, nostalgia. This is great, isn't it? Isn't it wonderful?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't feel that they, I don't feel that it to me it didn't come across that way. It was like, oh yeah, this is why I liked this character and things like that.
Right. Yeah, it's almost like the right way to do fan service.
Yeah.
This movie, in a way. It's kind of like fan service before fan service was really a thing.
Yes.
But yeah, actually, like I think in '89 there were a ton of sequels that came out that year. So I guess like that sort of culture is like starting to grow.
Yeah.
Let's pump out more like sequels of movies people loved, sort of thing.
Wasn't '89 when Return came out? Return of the Jedi?
No, that was like 83, 82.
My bad.
83, I think. But yeah, 89 was like, honestly can't think off the top of my head, but I do remember like scrolling through 89 films and being like, oh, there's got a lot of sequels going on here. But yeah, so the crew returns for, you've got a lot of like returning crew members. I think it was either Spielberg or Lucas kind of talked about how it was kind of like a happy family reunion.
Nice.
With everybody returning for this. But yeah, Robert Watts was the Indy producer. He's fun to listen to if you ever watch like the making of documentaries. He's in there talking about, he's usually like the one talking about the locations. And it's fun hearing him talk about that. Yeah, story credits for Lucas and Menno Meyjes, as we said. Screenplay credit for Jeffrey Boehm, but Tom Stoppard, the MVP of the script, without the credit. Douglas Slocum returns as the director of photography, cinematographer. Michael Kahn, his tried and true editor. Yeah, Michael Kahn is back. Yeah, just incredible how huge of a collaboration Spielberg and Kahn is. Same with John Williams too, doing the score. Everybody loves John Williams.
John Williams is great.
Yeah, a goat, I guess.
Yes, and I think one of the things, I don't know, we'll probably get into him as well, but just the way that it's almost like a musical type score, where you always have like the hints of everything in the background. And so like if you've not seen the movie but you've heard the John Williams score, you can start to kind of like get a feel of what's happening and like, oh, this is related to this and so forth. And he's just he's a writer. I mean, he is a writer, he writes music, but he tells a story as well, just in the score, which is,
I think the thing he does really well is he adds to character.
Yes.
Like, when you hear like the Imperial March, like you think of Darth Vader, and when you think of Darth Vader, you think of the Imperial March, and like same with like Indy. When you think of Indy, you think of the Indy March and the Raiders March, and when you think of the Raiders March, you think of Indiana Jones. It's like it's tied to. So I think that's one of the things he does really well.
I would agree.
That and cueing you in on like emotional beats.
Yes.
Too.
Without it seeming like forced. Or it's not like I was watching a show and like the music was swelling. And I was like, oh, okay, now they want me to feel emotional. And it's like, whereas when Williams does it, it's like I'm already feeling emotional and oh, wait. Okay, I see what you did there.
Yep. For sure. Yeah, sound and sound effects. You have Richard Hims and Ben Burt. Ben Burt is I like Ben Burt. He's a cool sound guy. He's one of those guys that's fun to hear about. Like in the making of stuff, he's like telling you where he got all the sounds that you hear. He's the Star Wars sound guy too.
Nice.
So
he did like
so
Foley
all the fun
stuff too.
He did what? Sorry.
Like like how you have like the scratching on the microphone, and then that's the actual.
Yeah. All of that stuff.
Yeah.
Like, so he basically, like, they had a catalog of like sounds that they used for all the indie films that they would like go back to, like
Wilhelm scream for sure.
Yeah.
Wilhelm.
But yeah, Elliot Scott does the production design with Steven Scott doing the art direction. Elliot Scott, I'm pretty sure, is returning as well. And then Peter Rob King does the makeup. Anthony Powell and Joanna Johnston do the costume, which I know for sure they're returning.
Yeah, I think she was in
crew
the first
members.
one too.
Mm-hmm. And I know Anthony Powell did. Yeah, she did. Yeah, she's the Indy costume. And Anthony Powell definitely was in Temple of Doom, I remember.
Yeah.
So special effects, Michael Lantieri. I don't know if he's returning. George Gibbs, I think, is returning doing like mechanical stuff. Visual effects, Michael J. McAllister. It's his first time as the VFX supervisor, but he did work on Temple of Doom as like one of the chief VFX cameramen. Vic Armstrong, who is like he's like Indiana Jones, like 1B, I guess you would say. Because he does like Harrison Ford. People like Harrison Ford like does all his stunts. Well, like not really. He doesn't do all of his stunts. Vic Armstrong does the coolest ones, really.
Yeah.
So if you see like something like crazy happening, it's probably Vic Armstrong. There's a few exceptions where Harrison Ford's doing like the really crazy thing, but yeah,
that's fair.
He did get pulled behind the truck on Raiders, but it was Vic Armstrong climbing under the truck. So you know, the harder part Vic Armstrong did.
Yeah. That hat stayed on his head the whole time.
That's always incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then really as far as crew goes, just wrapping up, you have Michael D. Moore and Frank Marshall doing some second unit directing. When you're shooting like a bunch of locations, it's just you got to have second unit directors. So.
Yeah. I think Frank Marshall, I think he eventually got married to KK or Kathleen Kennedy. Aren't they together?
I think they were married at one point. Are they still married? I think they might.
I don't know.
But Frank Marshall, Kathleen Kennedy, and Spielberg started Amblin together. So
okay, I knew there was some connection with all that.
Yeah, they they were like the three co-founders of Amblin, and Frank Marshall did a lot of like production work with Spielberg and Kennedy too.
And I think that he was only a producer. He was only a producer on Raiders. So I think now he got to step in on the director thing. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah. He did some second unit direction for Temple of Doom too. So yeah. And Color Purple too, I think. He did some directing when Spielberg couldn't be there. But yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, they're good collaborators. So really, I mean, it really is kind of like a family reunion for the crew. Cast is a little different. The cast kind of like turns over other than Harrison Ford. You have some returners from Raiders, but not from Temple of Doom. But yeah, Harrison Ford, Indiana Jones, obviously.
Woo!
Apparently he did contribute to the idea of having Indy's father, or at least was like going along with it. You know, it's like, oh yeah, let's do that. That's a great idea, sort of thing. And yeah, he said this was the most sophisticated and maybe most fun to make in one of the interviews, which I thought was cool to hear.
Yeah. And you could really tell that him and Sean Connery got along really well as well.
Yeah, and they did, and that was really cool. Like it seemed like they formed like a bit of a bond, you know, on set. It wasn't one of those things where like, oh, they must be so close, and then you turn the camera off and they're like they hate each other, which can happen. You know, that's what acting is.
Right.
You can pretend to like someone and and not actually like them. But this is not one of those that it seems like they actually like really enjoyed each other's company and working together. So
For sure.
Yeah, Sean Connery as Henry Jones,
Woo.
the Indiana Jones father. They Lucas wanted to hire Gregory Peck. Spielberg did not want Gregory Peck. I don't think he had anything against him.
Yeah.
I think it was just like he didn't think he was right for what he envisioned. Same thing with John Houseman, kind of a Shakespearean actor. He didn't want him. But yeah, they really kind of go full circle with casting Sean Connery, because in one of the influences for Indy was both Lucas and Spielberg both love Her Majesty's Secret Service, the Bond movie. So that's not Connery in that movie, but the Bond relation is there.
Yeah.
So yeah, kind of full circle. You get the original Bond in your Indiana Jones movie.
Right.
Yeah, Connery's kind of coming off of a little bit of another upswing in his career. He had done The Name of the Rose in '86, and then the big one was The Untouchables, Brian De Palma movie in '87. He actually won supporting actor for that role. So he was on an upswing, and he was actually like really delighted to take the part. It is funny, he's only 12 years older than Harrison Ford, which is
They did great with
funny.
the makeup.
Yeah.
Like makeup.
But Harrison Ford
like
looked young for a long time. Like he looks old now, but like for a long time he kind of like stayed in that like looking like he's like 35, 40.
That's fair.
But yeah, Connery was delighted to take the part at first, but kind of started like seeing that his character like doesn't appear till page 70 in the script. They have him written as like this sage, like wise Yoda character, and he was like not really into that.
Yeah.
But Sean Connery is like I guess infamous for like bringing his own notes and suggestions to his characters.
Yeah.
And so he gives a lot of input. And then Tom Stoppard too changed a lot of that stuff. So along with Connery's suggestions, so they really Stoppard really like saved them from losing Sean Connery probably.
I mean, I think if you think about like what we got versus if he was just like well, young Indy, you must do this, and it's like
yeah.
Okay, well, that would be
not
terrible.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, Connery. I read that he based his performance on Richard F. Burton, who was a Victorian era explorer. I know nothing about Mr. Burton, but I thought that was maybe there's someone out there listening who knows who Richard F. Burton is, and they're like, "Oh, so cool!
Yeah,
I didn't know that. I love Richard F. Burton." And shout out to our one fan of the Victorian era explorer. But yeah, he and then of course Connery adds his own little eccentricities to his characters too, which is always fun. So yeah, glad to get Sean Connery. Alison Doody plays Elsa.
Okay, sorry, had to get that.
She plays Elsa Schneider. They originally wanted someone named Amanda Redman, but she was deathly afraid of rats, so she did not take the role.
There were rats in this. A lot of rats.
Yes, a lot of rats. Yeah, Alison Doody was a 21-year-old Irish model. She had just been in A View to Kill, which another Bond connection there in 1985. She was kind of like a secondary Bond girl. She was one of the first to audition and ends up getting the part. She's 21 is very young for getting a role this big. So kudos to her. She must have done really well in her audition.
Yeah.
And really this is kind of like the peak of her career. She doesn't really do a whole lot that was notable in her career, but yeah, she obviously had to work a ton on an Austrian accent.
Yep.
She's not Austrian, so
I wouldn't have known she was Irish.
Yeah.
From there.
Yeah, I think she did really well.
Yeah.
Spielberg too, he thought she did very well, like playing off of the men and like nailing like comedy bits and stuff like that. Yeah, yeah. You got some returners. Denholm Elliott as Marcus Brody. He actually, I think I read that he was pretty ill during a lot of the filming. He had just been diagnosed with AIDS.
Wow.
So that's kind of sad.
Yeah.
You know, it's sad to hear, but you could tell in the movie. So
Yeah.
you know, kudos to him for, you know, pushing through that. He talked about in an interview how he really enjoyed his character, how his character becomes like someone with 3 left feet when he's out of his environment, which yeah definitely.
And he played it off well. It worked really well.
Yes, for sure. John Rhys Davies also returning as Sala.
Gimli.
Indy.
Yes.
I love how like overplayed John Rhys Davies does that role.
Yes.
Which I think he's kind of like just how he acts. But yeah, I can like hear his voice in my head going, Indy.
So he did such a good job.
Julian Glover comes on as Walter Donovan, our baddie in the movie. Yeah, he actually originally auditioned for Vogel, the Nazi guy, but they called him back and wanted him to be Donovan. So yeah, so he was I think he's British, so he had to do an American accent.
Yeah.
Well, so,
and I really can't. He's too like suave or debonair type thing to come off as the Nazi, because the Nazi you need a little bit of creepiness to it, or a little bit of like,
or maybe he's just a really good actor. Who knows?
That's true.
Know? Maybe he's really more Nazi like and he fooled us.
Oh my.
Yeah. And then of course we get to River Phoenix as the young Indy. He was 17 years old.
Wow.
Making this movie. But like what's crazy is he's 17, but he's already kind of had like some acclaimed roles. He was in Rob Reiner's Stand By Me in 86, Peter Weir's The Mosquito Coast in 86 also, and then Running on Empty, which was a Sidney Lumet film in 88. So he had some like really like worked with some really good directors already, and some popular roles. Ford is the one who recommended him because he worked with him on Mosquito Coast, and you know, knew how good of an actor he was, and even said he kind of like, out of all the kid actors he'd seen, he's like, he looks the most like I would have at that age, you know.
That's cool.
So yeah, and like I guess it also helps that he's worked with Ford, so he kind of has more insight into like how Ford acts and his mannerisms and stuff that he kind of has to pull off in that opening sequence. River Phoenix is, you know, he really like, it's unfortunate that he had a like James Dean sort of career. I think he was like, I want to say he was only like 22 or 23 when he died of an overdose.
Wow.
Super sad. But yeah, that really like is sad and sucks, because you know, he was just super promising as a young actor. Everybody thought he was like the next like just huge thing. And I mean, you can see it in this movie. He's great. I think he knocks it out of the park really as the young Indy. Just rolling through a few more people. You've got Michael Byrne as Vogel, Kevork. I'm gonna kill this name. Kevork Malikian, something like that, as Kazim.
Yep.
It's a tough name. Robert Edison plays the Grail Knight. They actually wanted Laurence Olivier, but he was pretty ill. Laurence Olivier, I think, ended up passing in the summer of '89. So this would have been '88 when they were filming, but he was pretty ill. So, but yeah, Robert Edison. I think I read that he had only been in like one film in like 1948 before this. He was he was a stage actor, so he wasn't really in a bunch of movies. So this is, I guess, his second movie. I didn't actually look at his like filmography and see if this was really actually his second movie, but that's what I read somewhere. So
Hey, it's all good.
Whoever I read that, if they lied, you can take it up with them. And then Richard Young plays, I think in the cast list, he's as Fedora, which I'm take to mean is the guy at the beginning of the movie that gives young Indy the fedora.
You are
and then
correct, by the way.
About the
at this point,
Edison.
He just done TV shows some, but that's about it.
Yeah. So. Yeah, mostly a stage actor. Yep. I mean, he was great. That's the Grail Knight. I loved that. I like it.
And he looked so like prestigious.
Yes.
Prestigious when he was just standing there. Goodbye.
Yeah. It makes when he delivers that you have chosen foolishly or whatever the line is, it makes it like come off really funny when he says that line. But yeah. The last cast member that I want to point out is our recurring gag role, and it kind of become like a running joke that Pat Roach would be in a fight scene in the movie. He actually wasn't in this one. It got cut, or they weren't able to film it or something like that. But you can see him in the movie still. He's like running along in a Nazi uniform at one point. So sad we didn't get a Pat Roach fight scene. He was the big plane Nazi that he fights at the plane, and he's like the guard that he fights in the like before they go down into the temple. Indy fights him in his like room.
So this is,
and then so he's like recurring, like, oh, we've got to have a fight scene with Pat Roach, but we didn't get it here.
So we need to blame Stoppard. He's ruined it. He's ruined our opportunity to get that third one. It's all his fault.
Maybe.
No, he hasn't.
Maybe it's not Stoppard. Let's not blame Stoppard.
Okay.
Because he did so much great for this movie. Surely it was somebody else's fault, right?
Okay, we'll give him a pass.
Yeah, so let's jump into the production. They start in May 1988 in Almeria, Spain. So you got the kind of Andalusian desert for a lot of like the action set piece exteriors, which is where they shoot a lot of like spaghetti westerns. So yes, so you got that kind of feel going on. But yeah, they do like, I mean, all of like the big action set pieces you think of were shot here. That's like the first things they shot. So the tank chase, the Messerschmitt plane chase, the beach scene, the plane in the tunnel stuff, like all that stuff was shot there in Almeria. And then they moved to Granada, Spain, and the only thing they did there was the railway station with Marcus Brody, where he's like, does anybody speak English?
Yes. And then he goes into the truck.
Yes, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that was in Granada. And then they move on to Elstree Studios, the faithful and true London studios where Spielberg shoots a lot, and Lucas both shoot a lot of stuff there.
Yeah.
So they do all the interior stuff is basically at Elstree. And they do some exterior stuff, like the Hitler scene is at some school in the north of London. They do some segments of the boat chase at the Grand Union Canal, London. So they do some exterior stuff there, but mostly it's just they're doing all the studio work and interior stuff there.
Yeah.
And then they actually go ahead.
The boat scene, and they're on the boat. I didn't miss that, did I? No, that was in a studio, right? I think. Yeah.
So like the part where it's like, so the exterior stuff they do is like where they're actually like riding the boats, but they do when they're doing like the stunt stuff, like with the propeller, that's in a tank at Elstree.
Okay. What about the one where he's on the boat when we see like kind of older Indy and he's being like punched? That was probably at Elstree.
That's at Elstree too. Okay. Probably.
Sorry,
I didn't see that specifically was at Elstree, but pretty much anything that's not, well, there is some stuff at Universal that they shoot that we'll talk about in a second, but pretty much anything that's not like an exterior, a real true exterior where you can tell like this was shot outside is at Elstree.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah. They do some second unit work in Venice. Also, Robert Watts, the producer, talks about how he did not want to shoot at Venice in the summer because it's very crowded. But he had to do it anyway. So they were able to like get control of part of a canal so that they could shoot it without, crowds of people around.
Because that was gonna be crazy.
Yeah. Yes. But yeah, they go from Venice and Elstree to Jordan and get the beautiful shots of Petra.
Yep.
Man, incredible. Really incredible stuff there.
That was.
Spielberg even talked about they were guests of the royal palace, and Queen Noor and her kids actually drove some of them to set one day, which is wild.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Which I had to look that up. She was the queen for a long time until she was married. She was actually like an American born, but of Jordan descent, and she married the guy that was the king of Jordan.
Okay, yeah.
And so, that I thought that was cool. That shot of Petra, and that's only like one part of Petra. There's actually like a lot more of that stuff with the stuff carved into the rock face. I think that would be really cool to go see.
I agree that all that stuff so cool.
Yeah. Maybe one day one day
we'll do like an establishing shot, like venture, like a
tour.
Cruise.
Yeah.
Yes, a tour.
A worldwide tour where we go to all the Spielberg locations.
Yes.
That'd be really cool. Got to go to Jurassic Park Island,
Yep. Just hope all the dinosaurs are gone.
They wrap up everything in the U.S. It's mostly like the opening stuff they shoot in the U.S. They do the train stuff in Colorado and New Mexico, and then they use the canyon lands in Utah for like the very opening, and then some of the like rock face stuff. They even talk. You've got the classic Paramount Mountain crossfade into into a rock or whatever. In Temple of Doom, it was on the gong that they transitioned. But yeah, and they kind of talked about, it was easy to find a rock to transition out in Utah, and because they searched for like forever in Hawaii for the original one.
Yeah,
it took them like a week or two to find the right thing. And then for Utah, they were like, "Oh yeah, it was easy. We just found one."
Yeah. Wow.
But yeah, they as I was saying earlier, the interior of the cave for the opening, and then the interior of the train they shot at Universal. So those are the only like interior stuff they didn't shoot at Elstree. And then they actually we might talk about this later, but they went back and added in the motorcycle with the sidecar stuff very late. And so they shot that kind of in the Bay Area, kind of around Lucas's home, somewhere around there. They shot that stuff.
Interesting.
Yeah. So production design, special effects, all that stuff. Let's talk about this, because I always love talking about this stuff. It's always so fun to see like the ingredients that makes all this stuff happen. The opening train sequence, you have this guy Jules Sylvester, who's the animal wrangler for the movie. And so they get like 4 to 5 alligator. You got to get all these animals for this circus train. So he said they got like 1,400 snakes, giant tortoises and lizards, and of course a lion.
Yeah,
got to get the lion. But yeah, for the snakes, he said that so they got River Phoenix laying on like 2,000 rubber snakes, and then when they call rolling, which rolling the camera, he dumps like 1,000 garter snakes onto River Phoenix. And then when they say action, he dumps another like 400 to 500 garter snakes onto Phoenix.
That's just, oh my goodness.
And then you've got like 9 people like are off camera collecting snakes and stuff, which is always it's like, oh,
it's so ridiculous, so crazy.
Yeah, but garter snakes, I guess, are like he was talking about how they're like kind of small and they're like really, really wriggly, so they really look good on camera. But yeah, that's a lot of snakes.
That is a lot of snakes.
It's not as many snakes as they had on Raiders, but
okay, interesting.
There was like 4,000 or 5,000 snakes and stuff on Raiders. It was
Wonder, do we know if oh no, I forgot the guy who played young Indy, if he has a
River,
if he
River
has a fear of
Phoenix
snakes now,
or
had a fear of snakes.
I guess we'll never know.
That's fair.
I guess not, since he seemed to be fine. I don't know. He kept running.
I guess so. Yeah.
But yeah, you've also got the rats. Got to talk about the rats. You've got snakes in the first movie, which you got snakes here too, I guess. Yeah. But snakes in the first movie, bugs in the second. I really like it's. Spielberg even said, he's like, I think we're running out of creepy crawly things to use. So, you've nailed like the big 3: snakes, bugs, and rats. Like,
I think spiders would be the only next thing.
Yeah, I guess. But I mean, there's spiders in the opening of Raiders.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, they kind of knock off the tarantulas, which tarantulas are more or less like harmless. But anyway, but they're big and spooky, scary looking. So Frank Marshall finds some rat breeders. So to be able to use rats on set, they have to breed them, because they have to do that to avoid like any diseases or whatever. So they have to be bred in captivity for them to be allowed to use them. So they bred around like 2,000 rats.
Wow.
For this movie, which I also heard somewhere 5,000, but I kind of doubt it was that many. 2,000 probably sounds right to me.
I wonder if they can do that nowadays. Like just breed a bunch of rats just because it's like, oh, something to me. It's like, yeah, I get. I mean,
it's just rats. Like
so many of them.
It's a lot of rats. But yeah, it is their first like creepy crawly thing that they can train.
Yeah,
you can't really train snakes or bugs.
That's true.
But so they did train the rats. They had them like on set for like 3 weeks doing like repetition stuff to get them to do kind of in general like what they wanted them to do. But yeah, Harrison Ford and Allison Doody both like didn't really have a whole lot of problem working with rats, which was kind of part of the getting hired.
Yeah.
Well, like not for Ford. For Ford, they probably would have cut the rats if he was like, I'm not doing rats. But he was cool. He said he was a nature counselor when he was a teen and did some work with rats then. So
interesting.
So and Doody was just like, yeah, I don't have a problem with it. I'm good. But one of the funny things is that rats apparently don't really make a lot of noise on set or whatever. Mm-hmm. But you want to have like rat noises. Ben Burt recorded these like high-pitched chicken sounds that he used for the rats. So it's actually chickens you're hearing when you're hearing all the rats chattering, which is really funny.
Yeah, very much.
And then, of course, you can't set rats on fire, so they had like mechanical rats for that part. They were like little. They like held one of them up, and it was just like this rat doing like the kind of rat crawl motion.
Yeah. Wow.
So yeah, it's what's funniest to me is you have all these rats go through all that work, and it's really just like, what do they have, like 2 minutes on screen?
Right. And wow.
This movie magic right there.
Yep.
All this work for 2 minutes of screen time.
That's one of the craziest things. Like when if anyone ever has the opportunity of going on like a set or whatnot, you see like we've just spent the last 3 hours setting up for like a 10-second shot if it doesn't get cut. And it's like, I think that was the most shocking thing on my end, like seeing that kind of stuff. So the whole thing with, so you got to think they had to breed all the rats. They had to train them for 3 weeks, and then you get only 2 minutes. Wow, that's...
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there was like a lot more footage of the rats,
Right.
but like the final edit, you get 2 minutes of rats.
Yeah.
But I mean, I loved it, you know. Love seeing all those sweet little guys running around, you know.
Yeah, you get the...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Ford really actually did like working with the rats. He was like holding one, talking to it on the making of. He was like, they're actually quite friendly. It's like, you know, holding a rat.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So another thing, the ship with the propeller thing, we talked about that a little bit, but yeah, that was shot in an Elstree backlot in a tank. George Gibbs was like the mechanical special effects guy, so he kind of oversaw that. But yeah, the propeller part of the tank had like about 15 feet of water, and the rest of the tank was like 4 feet. So you have to, I guess you have to have like deeper for the propeller to be able to turn. But it's an actual like boat like propeller that they had running, that was like chopping away at the boat. So it could have been dangerous. They did some things with perspective though.
Yeah.
So they had like the boat, the little inboard boats were like longer. They made some like longer ones so that there was like plenty of distance between the actor and the blades.
Yeah.
And then Spielberg shot with a long focal length lens. I think he said it was like a 250 millimeter lens that he shot with to get like a long focal length. So it kind of like makes in perspective, like they're actually like a lot farther away from the spinning blade, the dangerous spinning blade, but on screen it looks like they're closer than they are. So I thought that was cool.
Yeah,
that's definitely some movie magic stuff there.
I had a revelation while I was there. I was like, that scene you get with the propeller and everything, and then when they were going in between the two boats, I was like, this is why I have an irrational... I'm not like crazy, like phobia type thing, but this is why I have an irrational like fear of going between two semis, that they're just going to like close in and my car will explode. Or even like on boats, I'm not afraid of falling off the boat and drowning. I'm afraid of falling off the boat and being sucked into the propeller. And I think, so I now attribute that to this. I realized this. I was like, oh my gosh, this is where it came from.
It's a deep-seated fear from your childhood
from watching this every day for a week.
It's like, thank you, Spielberg.
Yes, thanks, buddy. That and dinosaurs, things I don't really have to be afraid of.
Yeah, that's things you don't have to actually be afraid of. That's a good fear to have, you know.
I guess so. Yeah.
Being afraid of dinosaurs is like, that's a good fear. Like,
it could be a lot worse.
You won't ever have that fear realized. So, I mean, until they get those fossils, that DNA from those fossils, we actually have a real Jurassic
Park. We've had many
Park.
movies why this is a bad idea.
Just don't do it, guys. Don't do it. If there's any scientists out there, don't do it.
You need to spend more time thinking about whether
lay off science.
Exactly. Thank you.
Oh man. Yeah, the fire scene where they're kind of tied together, which is a great it's a great sequence. So they a lot of the stuff in that is like fireproofed, like the curtains and whatnot. But really, like, they have to be able to control the fire, because even though a lot of stuff is fireproofed, it can still get out of control. So they have these like little I can't remember, they're like these gas pole sticks that they like turn gas on and off for, and they light them. So they turn the gas on and light them, and the fire comes out, and then when they're ready to cut, they just turn the gas off and the fire goes down. So that's how they do a lot of like, that's how they control the fire, which I thought was really interesting, because you don't really think about that until you're like watching like a making of doc, and you're like, wait a second, oh yeah, I guess they do need a way to control the fire, because fire's pretty crazy.
Yes. It just all goes up.
Yeah. Another interesting thing, so Anthony Powell, the costume designer, he apparently found a bunch of like genuine Nazi uniforms somewhere. He's just like, oh yeah, I found a bunch in Eastern Europe somewhere. You're like, oh, Okay.
Okay, if that works.
So yeah, got genuine Nazi uniforms.
I will say, like,
Yeah.
especially for bad guys, like having bad guys look good
Oh
is
yeah.
really important. And the Nazis have some of the best looking like uniforms, and so to be able to and I think you could tell. Like, I don't know if they had realistic uniforms in Raiders, but
Yeah, I
like
don't remember.
these looked so good.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think, and so that now that makes sense of why they looked
Oh, they're
really good, because
apparently-
they were the real thing.
Apparently found a box of them somewhere in Eastern
So,
Europe.
oh, here, have some Nazis. I was like, okay.
I mean, I'm sure whoever has a bunch of Nazi uniforms isn't like itching to hold on to them.
Right.
So
Yeah, that would be. Man, it's about, it was like 40. So that would be 40 some odd years after. Oh, 88. Yeah, about 40 years or so.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Interesting.
40-year-old uniforms, which is you know, I don't know, because in the when we were doing the color purple, we kind of talked about the costume designer for that was talking about how like body shapes change over time, and so like clothes from like way back when, like even if it was like in general the right size for you, probably wouldn't fit right because our like general body shapes kind of are different over time. I guess like maybe like your like the broadness of shoulders,
Right.
and you know your I guess like circumference of your like rib cages and stuff like that.
Or
So it
people are
makes
taller
sense.
nowadays too.
Yeah, taller. You need longer like shirts and whatnot.
Yeah.
So yeah, but so yeah, I don't know if that would apply like in 40 years. Maybe not as quite as much as, like turn of the century,
Right.
to 80s. But yeah.
Well, even if you think about it, like some of the actors that would have been like in their 50s or whatever would have been, you know, kids at that time. So it kind of makes sense from the same general stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense.
But the uniforms looked really good. I think
They
the
did, yeah.
props and the not necessarily the props, but the costuming was phenomenal. The only thing I would disagree about is the hat looked better in Raiders of the Lost Ark. But outside of that, everything looks super
you were
good.
telling me there's like some hat lore out there. There's like some people that are deep into Indy hats.
Like multiple dozens of pages, like going down into like the dip of the hat and like how tall it is and like moving around. It was made from a special so like the material went from being made out of like rabbit skin to beaver skin, because beaver skin was a little more durable, and they didn't get the right the person who was supplying the the rabbit skin was from Brazil, and then he went out of business, and they had to go and try to source it from somewhere else. And there's like a whole like fan pages on the internet where they're going in and they're just like looking and doing all the measurements and the whole story of how like because they originally made, I think you mentioned it in your Raiders one, about how this role was originally designed for Tom Selleck. And so they had a bunch of costuming for him, and then when Harrison Ford came on there, they had to kind of scrap a lot of the stuff, still keep the general ideas. And so who is it? I forgot her name, but the costuming,
Joanna Johnston.
Yes.
Yeah.
She took him to this like Lords and Noble or something, some like famous costuming shop that did stuff for the Queen and everything, and they had like 150 different fedoras, and they like threw them on the ground, and he had to like try them all on, and they had to go and find one where the brim was like wide enough, and but there's all this stuff, and it goes to make this iconic hat, and like these people are really into it, so much so that like they started like rioting, you know, online about all the stuff. And the fun fact is, one of the fans was so into the hat and wanted such a replica, because they didn't, you know, all the people from back in the 80s weren't doing the job anymore. This guy actually learned how to make hats and made his own Indy hat, and it was so good and so lifelike that's the hat they used for Kingdom of the Crystal Skull and the other one, Dial of Destiny. They actually used this fan made this guy who created a company because he's such a fan of the hat, and I would never have imagined like a hat having that much of a thing. But it's pretty cool.
Power in the hat.
So, but they did such a great job in the costuming. Everything just looks great on it. So
Yeah.
it was pretty
No,
cool.
that's awesome. I love that there's like whole fan pages just about Indy's hat. I
Just
love
about that.
that.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
It's you know, I always say like we do deep dives into these movies on my podcast, but I'll just say we don't do that deep of dives.
Yeah, there's some deep
That's a little
dives.
too deep.
Like even down to like the indentation is like 3 millimeters on this top part, and
That's
like
wild.
the bow of the hat like on the side is moved
Mhm.
forward just slightly for hair to fit Harrison Ford's head, whereas the kind you buy in the store, even for like $600, is like what they cost, it's back a little bit, and so it's crazy.
Wow.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
but
Wow. Yeah, so the hat is, I guess the hat is a little bit different for this one.
yeah,
Is
he
that
used
what?
the same
Okay.
hat for what's it called, the
Temple
of Doom,
Yeah.
and this one, because it was made out of beaver skin versus
Gotcha.
rabbit,
Yeah.
which
Well,
is more firm and rigid. Apparently, I don't know for sure, just from what I've seen, it's more firm and rigid. And because if you remember in Raiders of the Lost Ark, when he's in the water and the hat's kind of all droopily, it doesn't do that as much when he goes into the other places.
Gotcha.
And
that makes sense, huh?
It's very interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I now that you say that, that rings true. But I don't know that I would have noticed that without like hearing about this hat lore. So
yeah, same here.
it.
It's like one of those. And then when we get into the cinematography, there's hat lore cinematography that
yes.
I'll throw in.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yes.
Yeah, let's jump. We have a few more like production stuff to go through, but yeah, no, you're good. That's part of it. The hat. So we got the plane through the tunnel.
That was a cool scene.
Yeah. In the making of, you kind of see part of that. There's several things they have to do to make that happen. So, like one of the things in studio they do is like they're pulling like a train, not a train, a plane model, like through the studio on tracks, with some back projection behind it, on fire, that sort of thing. So you have that sort of stuff, and then they're not actually. I don't know. I didn't really like see and find in my research like how much actual plane flying was done.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of it was done in studio, and
you could see a lot of the green screen aspect in the planes. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah. But yeah, that's one of the things that maybe doesn't age that well, but when I watch, I don't really care. Like it still looks really good, even though you can tell it's like, kind of like done in studio sort of thing.
It looks better than the CGI for a lot of movies nowadays.
Yes, absolutely.
So we'll give it that.
Yeah. But yeah, the other thing is they didn't have obviously digital fire then. And so for like the tunnel thing, the only way that they could do it and make it look realistic was using miniatures. So like when when you have the guy like going by waving, I think that's like not a miniature, but the rest of it is done in miniature. So they made like a little tunnel. It had to be like big enough for the camera to go through and follow it through. And they had to like, time up the mini explosives just right, which I remember the guy that did a lot of the special effects work in 1941. He had talked about how doing explosives for miniatures is like super hard because it's an explosion, but you have to make it small. It's like,
wow,
how do you make an explosion small? And so you kind of have to like figure out some workarounds and how to like get the explosions and all that. So yeah, I thought that was really cool. It's always fun to see what stuff they do with miniatures.
Yeah. It's like with the AT-ATs and Star Wars, how like when you like look some of the behind the scenes, you see the little tauntauns were like little figures that they had to do the thing with, and it's like, oh wow, okay, wow,
yeah. Yeah, I love all that stuff. Yeah, and a lot of times, like when they're doing miniatures where there's characters, it's like little, stop motion puppets that they end up using. Like that's what they did for some of the minecart stuff in Temple of Doom. Was like stop motion with like some puppet models for the characters. So that's yeah.
I feel that with that they were like, we need to make a ride somehow. So we're just gonna. There you go. Now you have a ride.
Well, they wanted to do a mine chase in Raiders and ended up doing it. Just kind of rolled over, and they were able to do it in Temple of Doom.
Okay.
So I wonder if there was any of that stuff here. I didn't see it in my research, but I can only imagine there was like ideas they had that they couldn't fit in the temple that they were able to do here. Probably. Yeah. I do know that Lucas was determined to get a World War I tank in the film.
Yeah.
So maybe that's one of the things. Maybe that's one of the ones that Lucas really had been itching to do and finally was able to fit it in. But yeah.
That was that was such a crazy scene.
Yeah. Well, what's crazy about it is Spielberg, so it wasn't like written in necessarily to the script. Spielberg wrote it in storyboard, basically. That whole like tank chase sequence.
It's just a long chase too.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it just like goes to show Spielberg just has those like big action set pieces are just like come so naturally to him.
Yeah.
He can just envision it in his mind. Just yeah, so good. And like the geography of it, and you like having and you're being able to like with the camera and the editing show like help the audience keep their where they are and what's happening and where everyone is in a sequence like that. So good.
Yeah, so good.
But yeah, Ford, the other thing I thought was funny is in the making of doc, it like cuts to like Harrison Ford with the story flipping through the storyboard with his horse and being like talking to his horse and being like, and then we're gonna go here and
That's great.
Yeah, you gotta love the little sense of humor. Ford was having fun, so yeah, they originally were gonna get a small like French Renault tank, but George Gibbs, the mechanical special effects guy, he was like, well, I think I might just build one. So he built like a real still 28-ton tank, is like the one that you see driving through, and it's like functional and like
I'm gonna go ahead and build a tank.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
Yeah. And then of course they build a second one that's like kind of like one that's pulled by a truck where they can get some. That's basically the one where they do like all the fighting on top of it.
Okay, that makes sense.
So you can have like a camera mounted in the back of the truck.
Yeah.
And cameras following it on the sides. And so that one, the tracks actually don't even like touch the ground for that one. It's just it's pulled behind on some sort of like cart, I guess. So like when Ford's like when Indy's face is like by the tracks and stuff, and the tracks are turning, those tracks aren't actually like touching the ground.
That's cool.
Yeah. But yeah, I thought that was cool. Movie magic. Yeah, Vic Armstrong was talking about how the tanks really only move like 10 to 12 miles an hour, but they make they're wanting to make them look faster. So so riding the horse next to a tank that's only moving like 12 miles an hour is actually pretty. He was like, it's actually kind of hard to like get it to look right on screen,
because you need the horse to look it's actually trying.
Yeah, you've got to make the horse look like it's actually running hard, but it's actually not. It's actually kind of moving pretty slow. So yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, they end up shooting like 8 to 10 days for this. It was, I think, originally slated for like 2 days, and so they spent a lot of time getting this chase, this tank chase.
Well, it was like 20 minutes long. Didn't feel like it, but
it is pretty long. Yeah.
Within the thing, so I don't know. Whoever scheduled that for 2 days, that's pretty.
I think they just like got out there and expanded it. That's why Spielberg had to like storyboard so much of it.
That makes
like
sense.
because I think it was in the script, but just like not to the extent that they ended up doing.
Yeah, because there were a lot of different parts to it. You had the shooting of the tank, and then you had the inside the tank, and then you had the outside. Right. You had him hanging, and then Yeah, that guy.
Ford actually did do that stunt though, where he's hanging on the gun, and they are like, you got people like pouring dirt and stuff on top of him, and yeah, that was actually Ford, not Vic. That was one where it wasn't Vic; it was actually Ford.
Nice.
Yeah. The another funny aspect of the production, you've got the beach scene with like the seagulls and stuff.
Yeah.
And what they found out was that you can't really train seagulls. They just kind of do what they want to do.
Fair.
So they couldn't get the seagulls to fly like they wanted them to fly up. And so they just put a bunch of fake seagulls out on the beach for like the scenes where they're out there.
Yeah.
And then the flying ones are actually just doves, just white doves.
Train them more.
Yeah. So I thought that was funny.
There's
actually a cut in the making of doc where they're like, and action. And they're like shaking these boxes, and the birds just like aren't going anywhere. They will not fly out.
That's great.
Another just few things. So you got the final test sequence where he's going through, the three tests, the the breath of God, the word of God, just as far as production goes, one of the things I thought was cool was they showed like Spielberg kind of mapping out the Jehovah Stones. So they kind of have like pieces of, they haven't like drawn the letters on them yet, and just kind of are mapping it out. And he's like actually like testing, okay, I can jump from here to here, so we need to put like the the E here.
That's cool.
So he's like, a lot of people don't realize, but directors are like really like in the middle of everything. So good directors are, like Spielberg anyway. So he's literally like mapping out all of that stuff, which is really fun. The most, probably like I think Spielberg said it's one of the most interesting things, ILM, which is Lucas's like production design company, basically. One of the most interesting they did was the bridge for the Path of Gods.
Yeah.
It's like a forced perspective kind of illusion. So they actually did, it's like a miniature, and they had this guy, Paul Houston, paint it. So it's like a matte painting for that bridge, and he like literally just is painting like what he sees, that it's like matched up with, which it really is just incredible. And when it does like when the camera moves to the side and it reveals, it's like it's magical. Like it's really cool.
It looks and like nowadays I think you could easily say, oh, it's just CGI. But like back then they didn't have the CGI in this like the same way that we do now.
It's just there's a dude literally just like painting, like matching like exactly what's behind it.
Do you know, is this the same guy that did the painting for like the Death Star?
I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know.
All good. We'll find out in post.
Yeah. Well,
just because it's ILM,
or if you know and you're a listener, you can email.
Yes, let us know.
Email us. Yeah. Yeah, it is ILM, so it might be. Who knows?
Because I know that there was one like that whole scene, like when the Emperor's ship lands, and you have all the stormtroopers and everything out there. Apparently, that was just a painting. And
So they do. There's a lot of matte paintings for backgrounds. I know in Temple of Doom. I didn't see that there was as many here as there was for Temple of Doom. But yeah, let me see. I'm trying to do some like searching while it's Paul Houston. I see he has a Wikipedia page. So maybe he's a senior digital matte artist on the Star Wars trilogy special edition release.
Oh.
So Houston's work on the re-release of Star Wars began in '94. Oh, okay. New Mos Eisley scenes in Kenobi's hut. Okay. So I don't know. I'm not seeing anything about like the original stuff.
Yeah.
But it's also like not loading for me for some reason.
That's all good.
So yeah. So he's obviously got some Star Wars link there, but
Yeah.
So yeah, Paul Houston is that guy. Without the O, Huston. If people want to look it up. But yeah, I just thought that was incredible. That was like one of my favorite little like images in the whole movie. I think is the reveal of that bridge.
That was one of them where, like, I went back and I was like, wait a second, oh my gosh, it was there the whole time.
Yeah, you really do. Like, if you go back and like just do like move the frame forward and back, like it matches up.
It's
so like you can't really tell that it's different. It just really, really cool.
And then Spielberg with his, and we mentioned it briefly before about how you don't notice it till he moves the camera. Him knowing to like move the camera just enough to show you and then move it back. It's such an
move it back to like the exact point it needs to be.
Yeah. And then you're like, oh.
Yeah.
So
just
you
great.
get to kind of explore with it. So that's really good.
For sure, yeah. The other thing with those, when they're in the Grail room, there's the earthquake, so they have like these hydraulic gimbals that kind of move the floor pieces around. And Ben Burt said the sound is actually just like rubbing on an inflated balloon for the.
I guess you could. I could.
Yeah,
see
for
that,
the like.
Yeah,
all that stuff. And then he had a lot of like, I talked about, they have like a sound catalog. Right. They had just this catalog of at one point, they probably like for Raiders even, they might have done this, went out and done a bunch of dropping stones and rocks and sand and dirt. And so they had a catalog of those sounds that they are able to like pull from for stuff like that. So
yeah, that's Foley work is very interesting.
Yeah, for sure. It that sound stuff is
and how they
really
make
good.
sound out of things that aren't sounds.
Oh yeah. The last big production thing is obviously having Donovan turn into dust. You've got to have a healthy man turn to dust in like kind of one take, or like a movie magic one take. Right. He's obviously not really turning to dust in one take, but in one shot, I guess I should say, not one take.
It's all good.
But yeah, three. So they had like three different puppets in various stages of decay.
Yeah.
And so in the edit, obviously they have to like morph one to the other. So that's part of it. And then the final skin decay. For that, they pasted like a ton of little pieces of shrinkable plastic onto the puppet. And then obviously so they shot it in time lapse, and then they blew hot air on it. I don't know with what, but they blew hot air on it, and obviously like it's the shrinkable plastic, so blow the hot air on it, it like flies off. Like yeah,
interesting.
Yeah, I thought that was cool. It's always fun to see how they do that stuff.
For sure.
But yeah, I'm sure like if you like really just like watch the movie and try to pick apart stuff, you would see like a lot of little things that one of the production guys was just talking about how like you didn't have CGI then, and so there's a lot of like little things that you just like can't fix, and it just stays in the movies back then. And I think that's kind of cool, like that it's not perfect, it's
right.
It's I just think that's cool. Yeah,
it almost makes it more real, the fact that it's not perfect.
Right. Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. Would you like some fun facts?
I would.
I have some fun facts. Are you more into fun or facts? Or
I like it when my facts are fun.
Okay.
So I don't.
But do you like it when your fun is very factual? Because that sounds less appealing.
I was about to say that's slightly less desirable, but it could be. We'll find out.
Well, we're gonna do facts that are fun.
Okay.
So one of the fun facts is that Spielberg told the Nazi actors to cross their fingers behind their backs when they did the Nazi
nice.
Because it doesn't count if you cross your fingers.
Apparently not.
Yeah.
because this had a lot more like Nazis being Nazis, because it had like the book burning scene and
because
actually Hitler.
It is like more further into the war, I
Yeah.
guess. So that makes sense chronologically, I guess.
That makes sense. And now that I think about it, there's a one scene where like they're in the car and the guy comes and he's like, "Hi," you know, whatever he said, and you only see his one hand, you don't see his other hand. So there we go. Now we know that he waited.
Yeah.
Yep.
Crossing his fingers behind his back.
Exactly.
You know. Another fun fact: the Zeppelin scene is
one of the
set
best
in the winter. Yes, it's set in the winter, but it's actually really hot because it's the summer. And Sean Connery talked about how he sweats profusely, and so he did the scene without his trousers on to stay cooler. And since Ford was like, "You're really going to do it with no trousers?" and Connery's like, "Yeah." So Ford did it too with no
Oh man, now I feel like I want to go back and see where they had the cameras, like and just to kind of see.
I thought that was great. Some more hat stuff. Ford. I have a quote from Ford. He said the hat was always coming off.
That's interesting because the hat always stays on the thing.
Yeah, that's the movie magic, though. You edit the hat coming off out. You know.
I guess so.
You don't include that in.
That's interesting because he's always like that hat is like synonymous with him. Kind of like with the music and John Williams, like that hat and Indy, like it's an Indiana Jones hat. Like my hat that I have back there is a Fourth Doctor hat, but if one were to like see it, and oh, that's probably an Indiana Jones hat.
Yeah,
because we just kind of associate that fedora with Indy.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Last thing is not really it's more of it's not a fun fact. It's more of like a comforting fact, I guess you could say. Is Spielberg talked about how he really likes films that rely on the best of all departments coming together and not like relying on computer work.
That's good.
The quote I pulled was, "That's good old fashioned movie making." I think these indie movies are like a perfect example of like having just peak crew members in all departments, just like really nailing
the
their
best
jobs.
of the best of the best.
So,
no, that makes sense.
Let's talk a little bit of like cinematography, camera, editing, all that fun stuff.
Yeah,
I have a few notes here, and I know you wanted to talk some about this too, but I mean, you get all the typical like wide shots and close-ups and tracking shots and whatnot that we've come to expect from Spielberg. And you know, he's working again with Douglas Slocum, who's done all the indie movies. So you kind of have a thread of a look between the three films. Like, they all have a similar like feel and atmosphere. Obviously, like you got a lot of more reds in Temple of Doom, but I did think that this one seemed to have more like bright outdoor sequences than the first two did. I don't know if you noticed that, but
yes, because like even though in some of the ones in Raiders you had the outdoor in the in South America, it was still very like muted, almost like there was a filter
shaded
over
because you're in the forest too. So
whereas in this one, when you had like even oh my gosh, in the parts where the guy can't find where he's going, where I'm sorry, I'm bad with my names.
Brody,
where Brody can't find where he's going, like that just seems a lot brighter. I guess I just kind of attributed it to better quality cameras and everything.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah,
but it makes sense because
I think they're doing a lot more outdoor shooting too, just in general in this movie, like location outdoor stuff. So that might have something to do with it.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess it's not just all like, I think a lot of it in Raiders was, in Egypt or whatever the case is. Whereas not in, it's just in that thing. Whereas in this one, you actually got to go to Venice and you got to go.
Yeah. What were some things that stood out for you as far as like the cinematography work?
Yeah, I really liked the way in the beginning part, when you have with young Indiana Jones, and they're in that little cave area, and they're going in there, we're watching the guy with I think they called him Fedora Man or whatever, and they're watching him in there. The way that the camera is kind of like hidden behind rocks too, as they're like peeking over to kind of give us, oh, this is what they're seeing, kind of puts us in that like, oh, I'm being hidden type situation. I'm hiding too. I hope I don't get found out.
That's good. Yeah.
And then when they're on the train, and how we get to, and it's just a good shot, like, you know, a wide angle out where you get to kind of see them running. You get that really cool silhouette. But it gave us kind of a heads up of, oh, that's the rhino tank, or oh, that's the snake area, or rather with the snake one, I think it was we saw the snakes or the reptiles, and then it goes out and it shows the snake, and we're like, oh, okay. And so we kind of get to play along and like, but he does, so like with the reptile one, we see afterwards, so we don't always have foreknowledge, but then sometimes we do, and that kind of builds up anticipation and tension. And I think
that's really cool.
I think one of the other things, and this goes to the hat lore, I promise I'm not one of those hat guys, but they really love the silhouette of Indy with his hat.
Right.
And like the first thing you see in Raiders of the Lost Ark, you don't even see Indiana Jones' face for like the first 10 minutes. You see the hat. And once I heard that, I was like, wait a second, let me look. So I was looking around there, and then in The Last Crusade, of course, you see Indy more, but the hat and the silhouette of the hat and the way that it or not just with the hat, just his silhouette is really they do a lot with. And like even though you don't know who it is, you see that. And the introduction of Sean Connery. You've got Indy sitting there or sneaking in and whatever, and then in the background, like, you know, the camera's down, and then you see this shadowy figure with it ends up being Sean Connery with a vase, like, to go and crash on Indy's head. And just the way, like, with camera angles and using shadows to tell stories, because like it's almost like reminiscent of like a 1940s like movie poster where like it's kind of shot low and you see the high and like the thing, and it's just really like little clever things like that you don't see, but like you don't see, but like subconsciously you can begin to associate things. And it just I really like it when and I think that's one of the examples about the good old-fashioned filmmaking, because you had the lighting on spot, you had the photography good, you had even the way that, because nobody, if you're going to go and like hit someone over the head, you're not going to do the hold your arms up and then just kind of wait for a second and then crash in. So just all the little things working together create like really cool scenes.
Yeah, and I think it's like the design of like the set design and stuff play.
Yes.
Like when you were talking about the circus train stuff, and I was like, oh yeah, that's really like, I don't know that I like that stood out to me, but when you were talking through that, I was like, you're right. Like it really is like the way the camera like cues you in on what to expect, or maybe even sometimes like tricks you into expecting one thing and then doing something else. Yeah, it's so good. And one of the things that Spielberg does that I love is, you talked about Sean Connery coming in, and one of the things he does is, instead of like moving the frame to a character for a close-up, or zooming in on a character for a close-up, he'll have the character either step into frame or like move closer to the camera for their close-up.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I've seen it. It's in every Spielberg film, like basically up to this point, he does it. So a character will like walk into frame in a close up, or they'll like be farther away from camera and they'll walk closer up into frame.
Yeah. I think
one thing he does a lot with Indiana Jones specifically is he'll be facing away from the camera and he'll turn towards the camera for his close up. There's a lot of that.
Yes.
And I love all that stuff. It's really so cool. Good. And it's all like, usually it's not just like, a cool shot, it's usually like building character or revealing something about a character.
Yeah.
Like a lot of times when Indiana Jones turns around, it's like the emotion on his face that like tells you something.
Right.
But it's also like an interesting way to like get to a close-up shot too. So it's like, you know, the just like technique working alongside the storytelling.
Right.
Which is something that Spielberg is just great at.
I think in Jurassic Park, I think in the very beginning, Robert Molden like walks into the thing,
yeah,
the side thing, and that's yeah, that's
yeah.
very...
It's not. I'm telling you, he does it. It's like I think it's like a signature Spielberg move is like characters moving into the frame.
and that
I don't
kind
know.
of...
Maybe he stole it from somebody else before him. It's
Right.
probably so. But in this deep dive, that's something that I've seen that seems distinctive for Spielberg. So
It might have been the thing where he made it popular.
yeah.
He was like,
He
"Oh,
took
this is cool. Okay,
he
cool. I'm
took
gonna
something
perfect it."
like he took something he saw in like a older movie and yeah. I actually saw like it was like a more modern interview where Spielberg was talking about how you have a lot of like younger people these days that are like into film, but they're not like well versed in film history. And so he was talking about how like everyone he's like, oh, they'll know me and Scorsese and us guys, but like we're all just like stealing stuff from the guys before us. Like
Right.
it's like a like film as an art is like just builds on the generation before. Like you're just kind of taking and maybe tweaking or doing something different with what the guys before you did. So I thought that was cool. He's basically like saying, you know, you need to watch like older movies to really like learn more about film and see like the progression of film through the history of the art form. I thought that was really cool.
And now that after mentioning that, like I think the reason why I was looking at the shadows for like Sean Connery coming in is because in the movie Gaslight from the 1940s, because they didn't have the good lighting, they really played around with the shadows and that kind of stuff. So watching that movie, I was looking at that, and then when it happened in the movie, it subconsciously triggered like, wait a second, this is... So I think he's I think it also shows a good amount of like humbleness on Spielberg's staff that he was willing to point to that. But I think that's really important to go to the older movies, not just with your... Not just... And now granted, the stuff in the 80s, this is, you know what, this is like 40 plus years old.
Oh yeah.
So it's pretty old, but even older stuff that's closer to like the 80s, like 80 years old and whatnot, is although sometimes it can be difficult, but it's to kind of watch through some of it because there's some issues. But anyway, it's good stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Like so as far as editing goes, I think I mentioned this already, but yeah, they're going through the edit there, and him and Michael Kahn decide they need one more like action scene, and that's when they go back and film the motorcycle sidecar chase stuff. So they were actually like in the middle of editing or like getting close to finishing the editing, and they went back and added that because they felt like the rhythm of the movie called for like another action piece right there. And that is something about the indie films is they're like, because they're modeled after those old serials that you would go and watch, like the cliffhangers. You know, you got an action scene and there's a cliffhanger, and then you go back the next week and see the next one, and they're kind of like built like that in a feature film form. And so you have like every 10 to 15 minutes in a Indiana Jones film, some new action sequences starting up. You know, you maybe have like an action sequence and then a little bit of exposition or a little bit of like drama or whatever, and then you're back into action. So it really, like, you have to have that rhythm. And so him and Michael Kahn were like, okay, we really need like one more action piece to throw in right here to keep that rhythm going. So Spielberg is one of those guys that's like those directors that's always willing when he sees something not working, he's not just going to stick to his guns. He's going to go ahead and change it and make sure it's like the best, which I super appreciate.
I appreciate. And that scene, like, even though I had seen it, I hadn't watched the movie for a while prior to kind of like rewatching it for here.
Yeah.
But with that, it just flowed so smoothly because like they escaped from the castle, which that was really funny. There were a lot of like really like laugh out loud kind of catch you off guard type thing. But they go in there and he sets the boat, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is when they're going to get into the boat. And then they don't get in the boat. And I'm like, wait a second, I've been bamboozled. And then I was like thinking, I was like, okay, oh, that's right, they're going to send it off. And you know, it's interesting that Indy didn't wait because the people had been, you know, they had been bamboozled to chase them on the boat, but then they bust out of the crate in the double motorcycle.
Yeah, before they even take off on the boat.
Yeah,
I thought that was like, I was like, what are you doing? Like, wait a minute, let them get out on the water first.
But then, I could also think if I'm amped up on adrenaline, being chased by a thing, maybe I'm not going to wait.
You're just like, let me get out of here.
Yeah,
you know?
And that's, I think, part of the coolness, and we'll get into that later on. But with the Indy thing, but I think that's part of the coolness of Indy is that he's like an everyman type person.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But that whole scene, like that was a really fun scene too, because it also was, you've got Indy on the thing, and then when they do the jousting thing, like that was just so. And then they remember, and he throws it in there, and then you've got on the other side, you've got Sean Connery, who's just sitting in the car, like just doing his thing.
Bewildered.
Exactly, which really pairs the way that character, like the two characters are written. It really kind of sums them up, where he's kind of being dragged along with Indy's craziness. So I
think at one point he's like, "We're getting shot out," and he's like, "Yeah, it happens to me all the time," you know.
Yeah.
I love that he jousts. I love. Like,
I had forgotten about that.
I would love to be a fly on the wall in that the room where that was decided. They're like, what if we make Indiana Jones joust a guy off of his motorcycle?
And then he kept it and used it to throw into the wheel of the other one. So it's like, it's very, and that once again, that goes to Indiana Jones' character, who's very like resourceful and like, what am I going to do? Oh, okay, cool.
And it's almost, you can make it like the resourcefulness of Indiana Jones is like a like meta stand-in for the resourcefulness of like Spielberg and his filmmaking, and like using everything. I mean, it's not like obviously written for that reason, but like you can see it. It's like, you know, your character, you bleed into your characters and your story. So like Spielberg is a very like resourceful director. He like wants to use like everything, and and that like bleeds into the character of Indiana Jones, who is like very resourceful and like uses everything that's around him. And that's cool. Editing is an incredible I say it all the time on this podcast, but editing is like the way underappreciated art form.
It is
within like the overarching like film art form. But yeah, I loved in the making of, Robert Watts, the producer, was talking about how Michael Kahn is like a master at like fine tuning everything in the edit to play to the audience's emotion. And then it went to Michael Kahn talking about how he edits, and he was saying that he doesn't edit from like logic or like some sort of system or whatever. He edits from from feeling. And he was just kind of like, when I'm doing my editing, if it feels right, then I know it's good. And so that's, I guess that's like why he is able to edit into playing to emotion so well, is because like that's literally how he's editing. He's not like, oh, I've got to do this step 1, step 2. He's like trying to just piece it all together. And when he like gets an edit done and it feels right, then I mean that makes sense, because that is what movies are supposed to do. They're supposed to feel right. They're not. It's not some like logical whatever, but
and when you do get into that logical thing, then it becomes a lot of like what we have nowadays.
And then, so I'll say that, but like, so I did a series on Wes Anderson. His edits and his framing and everything is very like mechanical.
Yeah.
But he also like uses that as a tool to surprise you with emotion.
Mm-hmm.
So it's still like, while the edit isn't like I'm editing for feel, it is a very like mechanical, logical edit.
Yeah.
It's still used to propel the emotion. Like you have these surprising, because you're so like tuned into like the preciseness of everything in an Anderson film that like when the emotion comes, it's like almost catches you off guard.
Uh-huh.
And so
Right.
it still like plays to the emotion, even though like it's not the same as like the way Michael Kahn is playing to the emotion
Right.
with his edits. So that, I think that's an interesting contrast.
Yes. And I think part of it, there's just like you can tell when someone's a good photographer, because
Mhm.
like they just have the ability to capture that. Like it's almost like an innate thing. And
Yeah,
you can have people who are really just like fly off the cuff type thing, but then also people who are really specific, but they've just got that natural talent to begin with. And I think that might be part of where Kahn and Scorsese and like how all they kind of, how they with the way that they do the things, even though one may be super precise and like very like methodical, and the other one may be more off the cuff, they've just got that innate kind of feeling. And I do
Right.
think that editing is extremely underrated.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
it is. I've like, so my friend who's a director, when we've done our indie films and everything, he ends up being one of the ones directing or doing the editing. And so then I learned some things, and so I was like preparing the shots and like trying to find the best like version of, because when you have a conversation, when you're recording a conversation or filming a conversation, you're getting like 5 different angles. And so
Right.
he was like, okay, so if you could pare this down to like your 2 best ones that you think are good, and then I'll go and I'll pick the final sets. And so I'm looking through that. I'm like, okay, I like this section when this person says this, and and there's just so much, and it is so time consuming.
Yeah.
And so when people like Connor are able to do it and it works really well, and that's just that's very impressive.
And I mean, even like they're like shooting on film, even so. I mean, it's even harder. Like it's even more work to like lay out your edits and cut them to like you're literally cutting edits.
Wow.
You know, like you're not going. You're not like yeah. When you make cuts now, you're just like highlighting something and pressing delete. But back then you were literally physically cutting. So
that's crazy.
I guess the last thing as far as like the whole production goes is the score. We've talked a decent amount about the score earlier, but I love Williams when he's talking about the Indy score on the dock. He kind of describes it as like riding a bike. You know, you jump back in and you're like, yeah, I know exactly where I'm going. Like I know what to do, which is cool. He said Star Wars was similar, like jumping back into the Star Wars score each time was just like riding a bike. You kind of jump back in and get back into the groove of those themes and that music, and which is probably like sounds good, but like I mean he's a genius, so you know maybe it's just because he's a a musical score genius that feels like
that. So there's the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra. I'm in Atlanta, and so like the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra will do like the music of John Williams, and the person who is what was their name? The conductor will give a little intro about stuff, and some of the stuff that he talks about, like in the way that, because he'll talk about like how certain things were created, and so that's where he's the one that taught, or that showed that how the Emperor's theme is secretly hidden into the end of Anakin's theme at the thing. But and like how Jaws kind of came from the evening news, like the little anyway. But just those little things and seeing like the depth to which Williams went into things and how he does. And I think on the Raiders one, you guys talked about how I think it was the Raiders, how Indiana's theme kind of matched the Han and Leia theme.
The theme with him and Marion sounded very similar to me to Han and Leia's theme. Yeah,
it's very, and like I thought it was at first, because one of the things that the guy from the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra said is that if you want like just a great overview of like the thing, go to his ending score, because that's when he pulls in music from everything. And so every time before I have like an epic film score like channel I listen to when I do my own writing and stuff. I'll do that and I'll be like, oh, it's Star Wars, and then it's like, wait a second, it's not Star Wars, it's Indiana Jones. And so that's
there was one part of this movie where it sounded like it was about to start up the Imperial March, I think. But it was just like a tiny little piece that sounded similar to something in the Imperial March. Yeah.
Right. And then we did briefly discuss it before, but just about like how kind of it's like a rock opera or whatever, where you can tell what's the tone's supposed to be, and like the Nazis are here, and you get the Nazi version, the music of it, and that just kind of prepares you for like, oh, this is what's going to happen. I think that happened when they were in the Zeppelin and everyone thought they were good, and then you hear like the dun, 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 or whatever it was, I forgot it, and then they're the Nazi guys are walking to the Zeppelin. And so it's just it just adds so much to it.
Yeah, I think he said too the score for this one was like 2 hours. Like it's the orchestra's like playing almost the whole time, which is wild.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So they're wrapping up. They're getting ready to release it. It actually releases like a year after they start production. But yeah, they're doing the marketing. Spielberg's like, this is my last indie film. You know, whatever, which was the original plan. And that was true for a while. It was the last indie film for like 19 years, I think. But yeah, so they release it in the US May 24th, 1989. And yeah, it's a big hit. I mean, it's the worldwide box office ends up being 474 million, which I think adjusted is like $1 billion movie.
Wow.
Basically. But yeah, it was the highest grossing worldwide box office of 89, but domestically it got second to Batman. But yeah, worldwide was highest. And I mean, I think the budget was 44 million, I think is what I saw in my research. So it was the biggest budget of any of the indie films and the biggest box office of any of the indie films.
You're right. 1.2 million or 1.2 billion today.
Billion, yeah. Adjusted from 474, yeah. And at the time it was the 11th highest worldwide box office, I think. So yeah, it was a big hit. It was his biggest hit since E.T. The press was largely kind to the film. And really, like, by this point, indie films had become, like, critic-proof for audiences. Like, it's a growing fan base. People don't really care if critics like it or not. They're going to go see it. So,
that's interesting that was happening because for me, Temple of Doom was, like, a huge, like, setback. And, like, I would have been, like, super skeptical because I was like, because it was really dark. It was,
I think
rough.
people like kind of came around, like it still did. Temple of Doom still did well. Like,
I know a lot of people really like it.
Yeah. And I think it kind of gained like, it got some like pushback but it did like, it still did really well. And like, I think also like was one of those movies that kind of like got a second win too. And people like really liked it. Kind of later on, but yeah, I mean, especially when you get to put Sean Connery on the poster with Harrison Ford, it's like, people are going to come.
Because this is after Connery was Bond, right?
Oh yeah, Connery kind of like he was Bond in the 50s.
Okay, yeah, we're good. Sorry,
So yeah, or 60s. Sorry,
yeah,
not 50s, 60s.
Okay, just making
so,
sure.
Yeah,
I was pretty sure, but I was like, okay, maybe I'll ask it.
Yeah, I think that's like, I don't know if that was like the very beginning of his career, but it was towards the beginning of his career. He was Bond.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that not all the critics liked it though. There was a lot of reviewers that found it kind of mechanical and like falling off of energy. Which I guess if you're viewing it with a certain perspective, I guess you could see that. But yeah, I always like to read Pauline Kael's reviews from the New Yorker because she is very like she's one of those like she's either gonna like really like it or really like nail it or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I just like her reviews, even if I disagree with her take on this, but I just love I still like reading her reviews. She said, quotes, it simply is sorry, I must have copied and pasted this wrong, but she said something to the effect of it simply isn't like it doesn't have like the exhilarating leaping precision that Spielberg gave us in the past. And I just kind of think that's wrong.
I thought the pacing was fantastic.
Yeah. I guess, I don't know. I guess so. It could be one of those things where a certain type of person, like I guess Pauline Kael was, maybe feels like you have to do something new and different. And I guess this is doing a lot of like the same things that have worked before. And I guess some people might see that as like, oh, you're not growing as a director. You're just doing the same old stuff. But it's also like, well, if it's not broke, like why fix it?
Right.
In my opinion, like it works. So like,
and it didn't follow a formula. It did a lot of the same things, but it wasn't like formulaic.
Right.
It was like, oh, we're gonna like even down to we're gonna hide people like in a bus that the stand isn't really a stand, like, but it was done in a different way and wasn't like, oh, how are they gonna escape? This time it was like, haha, you subverted my expectations, and the guy you're trying to save is going into the Nazis' place as opposed to hiding from the Nazis in there. And like, so I think that was I think that's how it was able to stay fresh and be new, because it was still it was doing things differently, but we were familiar with, so we weren't as it wasn't like
I think this is doing enough new stuff with an indie film that like I don't know, I think it's a step forward even for the indie films.
I agree.
But yeah, as far as awards go, it got Oscar nominations for the sound and for the score, and it won an Oscar for sound effects editing. So Ben Burt and Richard Himes got their Oscar statuettes. And the other thing that came out of this was there was actually a TV series from 92 to 93 called The Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, starring Sean Patrick Flannery as the young Indiana Jones. But apparently the show flopped. It didn't do very well. But it did have 4 TV films that starred the same guy, Flannery, as young Indiana Jones from 94 to 96. So
I remember
apparently aren't that great. So
no.
They wanted River Phoenix to do it, and he did not want to do it. So they had to get somebody else.
That's fair.
Yeah, I don't blame him.
He did.
He was basically like a movie star at this point. So I mean, why would you start doing like TV?
Hello again. Do you know how you can really support the show for free in just a few minutes or less? That's right. Just leave a rating and review on Spotify and Apple, or wherever you listen that might allow for ratings and reviews. These really help the visibility of the podcast. In fact, just hit that pause button right now and drop the review right now. And then you can get back to the show. I'd greatly appreciate it. Okay, I trust that you went and left that rating and review now. Back to the show.
Let's just kind of talk about some just key things about the movie.
Okay.
Dig in a little bit more. One of the things that I thought was it's more of like a Spielberg related, like where he was in life. So it's really like a weird period for Spielberg. And he seems to kind of be a little bit lost in his career and life, trying to find himself. And I kind of, because of that, I feel, because I mean, he's coming off The Color Purple and Empire of the Sun, which didn't do as well as he wanted them to do.
Right.
He's a new dad, at this, fairly new dad. I guess his kid is, let's think. I guess his kid is probably like 3-ish, 3, 4 at this point. So fairly new dad. He's got a marriage that's not doing that great. And so to me, I kind of see this as like, oh, it's kind of like a safe swing. Like he gets to re-immerse himself into the Indiana Jones world. Like it's a safe swing in a point in his life where like a lot of stuff is like on the rocks. He's not really sure, where he's going, both like career wise and like in his life.
Right.
And so like, this is kind of like, let me jump back into this. And then like like re-immersing in his youth with the father-son story and everything. He goes on. So if you think about like the progression to where he goes after this, he goes on to explore like divorce with Victor. So Always, his next movie, is kind of like a remake of a guy named Joe, Victor Fleming's movie. And then like he goes on to do Hook, which is a Peter Pan story. So he's really like re-immersing himself in his youth after doing a couple of more drama mature films. But yeah, this one, I feel like it's kind of like a safety blanket almost in the middle of this like lost period, where he's like, okay, let me like step back from doing, we talked about, he stepped back from Rain Man and do something that I know people are going to love, that I know like that I can do well. And I think that's a good move,
It is.
At a fraught time in your life to kind of step back and do something that you can do and that like will be a good experience,
And I think he was able to pull it off, obviously, because that's my favorite Indiana Jones movie. But he was able to, I think this goes back to that whole thing we talked about where I don't have a right term for it, but just how he's able to not like push himself into it and able to like kind of stand back and be so he was able to explore himself on exactly and he was able to explore those things without doing it. So I think that was because if just by watching that I wouldn't have thought anything about what was going on.
What's going on in his life? Yeah.
I think that's important because that makes it more timeless.
Right. He's for sure doing that through his career. He's kind of like working through, and even like there's certain interviews that I've heard where he says like, especially like in his early days, his like early career, he says like movies were my therapy. Like he was kind of working through his stuff through his movies, but he's able to tap into that universal language so that like it doesn't feel like you're watching some dude deal with his problems.
Right.
Like it feels more like universal. Because another thing at this time was he is reconciling. He's, I think, starting to maybe at least reconcile with his fathers after like 11 years of estrangement. Because this is, if you've seen The Fabelmans, you probably like remember this aspect, but he thought his parents' divorce was because his dad was kind of absent and working, kind of a workaholic. but he found out like later on that his mother was actually having an affair, and that's why they got divorced. And so he's kind of starting to reconcile with his father at this point, and that plays into this film and the subsequent ones, you know,
Yeah.
and the sort of things he's exploring.
And they even like mentioned something where he's like, when they're on the Zeppelin, and they say something about your mom never knew or whatever, and it could be that the dad was estranged, and that's kind of what you think, but then it could be a situation where, well, yeah, she cheated on him, because but that subtle thing, once again, that's something, if you didn't know what was going on, you would just think, oh, this is just part of a conversation that a father and a son would need to broach at some point. So yeah, it was good.
Yeah. He's also like obviously not doing that great with Amy Irving when they're shooting, because the not long after they released the movie in June of '89, they divorce. So he's dealing with that too. And he really doesn't like start a upswing in his personal life until he marries Kate Capshaw in '91. And also like meets his future collaborator, Janusz Kaminski, around this time too. So he's really just in a period of just kind of like a dip in his personal life. And luckily we have this like really great film in the middle of that, like just weird part of his life.
I wonder, not to get overly religious, but you've got that kind of idea where, like, you know, when Jesus is really upset at the Pharisees and that for how dare you try to heal this man, and Jesus is like, go ahead and raise your hand, like how he channeled that anger and frustration and something creative and beautiful and whatnot. I wonder if this is kind of like the way Spielberg did it, because now knowing even more about what had happened, it's like the fact that this was such a hopeful and positive and funny and all that kind of movie is like he was channeling all that stuff into something beautiful and
optimistic. And
yes, thank you, optimistic, very optimistic, and almost idealistic in some ways. So
well, like, he's a very like sentimental and idealistic director, and even in these periods where like he's like Empire of the Sun was probably the most like unidealistic and unsentimental movie he had made up to this point. Pretty much everything else is very like, you can see even in moments of his life where he just like wasn't doing well personally, his films are still like very sentimental and optimistic. And I really appreciate that. You know, he's able to like work through that stuff. Obviously he's working through it, and you can see it if you know what he's going through in his life. You can kind of see it in the film, but it doesn't come through in a mean way, and it doesn't come through in a resentful way. It's still like, like you said, like idealistic, and
in the end they ride off into the sunset.
Right. Yeah.
And that's kind of like, that's like the ideal. Like that's our goal, is to be able to ride off into the sunset and be happy.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mentioned some Spielberg distinctives earlier. I always like to talk about some of those. One of them that you see throughout the tension building. He's great at like building tension through not like big things, but just like little moments and little things. Like one of the standout thing in this movie to me was the tension when he's going through like the 3 tests before they get to the grill room. But the way he builds tension is he like does these intercuts between Indy doing the test and Henry like talking about what he needs to do, like as he's like, you know, bleeding out from his gunshot wound.
And so he's going through, and you have like Indy saying the penitent man, or whatever the phrase is. I don't remember. I'm sorry. And then you've got him and even then, like sometimes Henry didn't. And he didn't know how to do it, so he couldn't just yell, "Remember this?" Well, no, he did with the Jehovah with the eye, and that's like,
well, he said it, but Indy's not hearing it.
Right, exactly.
They're separate, like they're separated. They can't hear each other.
And that is even more tension, because it's like, he knows. How are we going to tell him? We
Yeah.
can't tell him. Nobody know. Yeah.
It's just it's a very different, unique way to build tension through that
Yeah.
intercutting back and forth. I thought that was really cool.
I agree. I hadn't thought of that prior. And then even then, so now that I thought about it, now I'm thinking more about it. How he's just saying the same things that had been repeated throughout the show, or throughout the movie, and the hints, and he's just like remembering it, and but then we're getting to see it happening, and how they're figuring out in real time, which is kind of for us, we get to kind of figure it out real time as well. Right. We're put into that tension.
Yeah. And it brings in like just like that signature thing about the indie films, like the mystery and the like solving the mystery is like part of the fun of an Indiana Jones movie.
Exactly.
And that's something that Temple of Doom really lost, I felt like, was that solving a mystery aspect. And so it's just like refreshing to get that back with Last Crusade.
And even though it was only like the last like 15 minutes of the movie, or last 20 minutes of it, and the rest of it was getting to the journey, but it was that part. It was such a good payoff. You didn't have to spend, the whole thing of trying to figure it out. It's just that was. Whereas in Raiders of the Lost Ark, they were establishing that Indy was the one that knew all this stuff, and that so we're not part of that process. But then we got to be part of it, and even like showing. At least in the first one with the Breath of God test, how the one person got their head chopped off. Yeah. So then we got to like see, and they're like, okay, let's see. Oh, I wonder if that's something, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and it also like gets you. I don't know. Donovan is like actually like a really good little villain. I thought. Yeah. You get to see some of that in that sequence for sure.
And that was. Do we have a part where we're going to talk about the villains? Because I have more.
Yeah, we can. We can hit it when we'll talk about characters and
cool
in a second, and I'll give you some area to talk about that. Yeah. Another Spielberg. We talked a little bit about like the wide shots. You get close-ups. We talked about that Spielberg distinctive. One of the things that's a Spielberg distinctive that I love that is. So I don't think Spielberg is great at doing like a full-on comedy movie because 1941 was a disaster of a movie. But he is actually like really good at comedy, but it's like these short little gags and stuff like that he puts into like the other, like it's like add-ons. He's really good at like comedic add-ons. And so I was like thinking like, okay, what are all like the gags in this movie? So I was like, made a list of all the like funny things I thought was funny that made me like chuckle as I watched the movie. The very first one is when young Indy like misses the horse when he jumps off and the horse runs forward. And I'm like, oh, that's good.
Because he caught it. He jumped on the horse that way normally, like in Raiders, I think, right?
Yeah.
He like lands perfectly. And
exactly.
that type
so it's a callback. Yep. It's a call, so it's like a double joke. It's like he misses it, and that's just like funny slapstick, but also like it's a callback to Indy jumping on the horse. In the first one. One of my favorite gags in the movie is the librarian when he's stamping the books and Indy's banging on the stone. he's so confused. He's like, how is my stamp making this? And it's just like, it's really stupid, but it's just funny. I love it.
And it also brought back to like, even though it's unrealistic, it's also realistic because it's like, well, you know what? People aren't just going to be randomly able to destroy things without making noise. But he's like, I'm going to take this and then funnel this silliness into, or funnel this real thing that would happen into something that's kind of silly and go from there.
It's silly that it's happening in the first place. So why not? Let's just make a gag out of it,
and address the reality.
The reality is, who's gonna just like let this guy like destroy the floor of the library? But so they just kind of lean into that and like, okay, we'll make it a gag, you know, why don't people notice the noise? Oh, it's because this guy thinks it's his stamp.
Right. But even then, they did mention, like, think, oh, the library is closing. I'm going to go and make sure that we're good.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he knows enough
man.
to throw in the little things too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah. That's a little detail that's there that I wasn't even thinking about. You get the line, Nazis. I hate these guys. It's just so funny.
Yeah.
A funny line. Yeah, let me run through these. Some other lines that I love. No ticket, when he throws the and everybody like holds up their ticket.
Yes, that's so good.
The Indy. So when Indy gives the speech about Brody's like competence, and then it cuts to Brody's like, does anybody speak English?
Yeah, he can speak 12 languages, and he's good. He's already there now.
It's great. It's a great comedic little thing. The Sean Connery actually has some really good like comedic delivery.
Yeah.
He's like, there's a fire. It's like, and he's like, thinks it's a metaphor. He's like, no, look, it's an actual fire.
Yeah.
Love it. And the other one is when he's like manning the gun on the plane, and he shoots the tail of the plane. He's just like, oh, looks like they got us, son.
That was so good, because like in both situations he caused it, but he just like played it off and let
it off.
Indy think that it was. Because I think in that one he's like, did they shoot us? And he's like, because you could tell he was trying to figure out like, how am I going to explain this?
Yeah.
And once again, that's a very realistic thing that if you've never shot the gun thing, you might not even think about.
Yeah.
And then they play it off and make it good.
Oh yeah.
And I think in the fireplace twisty thing, when they find the secret thing, that was just when they spin around one time and they don't show anything, and then they go to the second time, and then do they get noticed, and they're like, oh, that was really good too.
Yeah, I love that. That I don't know that lady's yelling is supposed to be funny, but it's pretty funny. She's just like, yeah. I don't know what she's saying. Something in German. But...
I think she said allies.
Oh, is that what she said?
That's how I heard it this last time, but who knows?
A lot of times I have subtitles on, but I didn't have subtitles on this time. So yeah, I don't know. I did have a few little quibbles with the film.
Well, just real quick, the pen is mightier than the sword.
Oh yeah. I forgot to mention that. That's a great
one that I have a fountain pen, and I was like, if ever I need to do, and that's stuck with me, like from when I was a little kid watching it. And the thing, just the pen is mightier than because I'm not the type of person, and I've never have been I'm gonna go out and punch people and whatnot, but I'll like try to outsmart them. And so like I was able to relate to the dad in that one. I was like, ha, and just like how, and I like the fact that it was Brody who got a kick out of it. They're like in this super situation. They're almost
and he's
about
like
to die.
Over explaining.
Yeah, he's like,
which makes it
the
funny.
pen is mightier. It's so good. It's great.
Yeah. Anyway, of course you have like the named after the dog gag too. I forgot to mention that,
which is a fun. Real thing. Isn't it is. Yeah.
It's Lucas's dog is named Indiana, so that's what the character is named after. Yeah,
but the character's real name is Junior Indiana Jones, I think.
It's Henry. Yeah, Henry Jones Jr.
Oh, okay.
That's his actual name, and he took on the dog's name. Yeah.
Okay, good deal. That's good.
Yeah. A few fun little quibbles. Sometimes I find some quibbles. Which this is a movie that I love, so these are really like insignificant quibbles. I just think they're kind of funny.
Yeah.
The first one is like Indy bases his entire persona on this guy he meets for like 30 seconds as a kid.
Yeah.
Like, what's that about?
Because
apparently though they originally intended for that character to be Marion's dad, who like became his mentor, but they just like that never materialized in the script, I guess. And so, so I'm just being like, oh, so this guy like takes this cross and like gives him a fedora, and he's like, that's who I want to be.
Yeah, that is,
which I guess is like, that happens with kids, I guess, you know.
Yeah.
You know, they're easily like, I want to be just like this person that I don't really know,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and then yeah, that makes sense. Yep. Anyway, yep. That we'll leave there. Yeah.
Yeah. The another quibble is what's the deal with the cruciform sword brotherhood? Like, who are these guys, and why do they care so much about the Grail? And like, it's just like it's just like kind of weird. I don't I don't really get those guys, but
We're gonna
whatever,
go
it's
kill
fun.
you, and then it's like, oh no, you don't care about the Grail. Okay, cool. Go on about
Yeah.
your business. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just I don't know. It's a quibble. It's still fun. I don't really care that much about it.
Yeah.
The only other quibble I have is, why does someone need to protect the Grail if it becomes ineffective when you leave the room? Like, what?
Yeah.
Why do you, like, who
That's
cares?
fair.
Like, who cares if someone is immortal living in this room? Like,
Right.
I don't
And-
know. I guess it's just because it's sacred, I guess that's the thing. Like, it's
Was it that
sacred and holy, so you don't want just anyone getting to it. I don't know.
And then they don't. Oh, okay. Well, that I guess that's more cool to the other one because obviously he ages and stuff like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But
so it because he does leave the room, but it I guess it's power enough to heal the thing.
so I was
the
under
moment.
the impression that it worked, but if you took the cup past the seal, then the cup just became a normal cup, and it was no longer the Holy Grail.
Right.
But that it would still, like, if the Nazis, like if Hitler were to go in there and drink it and then leave, then he would have the benefits of it.
I don't think so. That's not the idea that I got from the way the knight described it. The way I understood it is like, if you leave the room, then you're just like, you're back to normal.
Yeah, that
Maybe I'm
even-
wrong on that. Maybe you're right. Maybe it is only like if the cup leaves the room, it's useless. Maybe it is like you can drink and then leave. That
then
would,
again,
I
why
guess,
would-
make more sense as to why someone needs to guard it.
yeah.
But that's not how I understood it. I don't know.
And then
It
why were
wasn't
there so many cups there?
Well, yeah, that was that. I did like that aspect.
I did, yes.
That was
and
fun.
that was one of the ones that's always okay. So let me ask you this: did Elsa intentionally try to sabotage the guy?
Oh yeah,
Do you
absolutely.
think it was okay?
Oh yeah, she didn't like that dude.
At-
She was just interested in the Grail. She
yeah,
just like
it
Indy was, I think.
Because this watching it through the most recent time, I began to realize, like, wait a second, she's disillusioned with the Nazis because they hate knowledge and stuff like that.
Right. She doesn't like, she's not all about the Nazis. Like, she's not lying when she says she's not interested in the Nazis, I think, earlier in the movie.
But
well, you get that shot of her like tearing up when they're burning the books.
Right.
It's like a very character building little close up that tells you so much about who she is.
Yeah.
And
this
what
is the
she
first
cares
time
about.
I really like paid attention to that part. I was like, wait a second, she
Yeah.
and that's why she doesn't scream. And then when he's like doesn't kill her, but not that is interesting.
Absolutely, yeah. Are there any other like really intriguing or like important like images or sequences that you like stand out to you in the film?
I thought we talked about like the jousting on the motorcycle being a really cool thing. When he has the notebook and he meets Hitler.
Yeah.
Like that was a really like kind of funny, but then also kind of like, oh, he's and then like how Hitler kind of signs it right
tension.
on. Yeah, it's very interesting, and how like Indy's got to decide, well, what am I gonna do? I need to survive, and then how he goes in there and how it was just all kind of like random too. How it wasn't like he was intending, and I thought that was interesting and kind of goes into the whole thing of like, well, Hitler was signing autographs because at the time Hitler was very popular in Germany.
Oh yeah.
And it brings us back to reality and like seeing how people glorified him and that kind of stuff, while still we know that it's bad, obviously. And
Right.
and then kind of seeing like, oh, well, what, almost as if Spielberg was like, I wonder what would happen if, and
Oh,
unlike
yeah,
the Captain America punch the Nazi thing, it was I'm going to get this book, or, you know, and then he signs it, which I just think is, and Hitler even looks through it a little bit. So, and I think that was another thing of adding extra tension to it. Because
Sure.
like, does Hitler actually know what's going on with this? Is he going to recognize it?
Turns out he's just a doofus.
Yep, he's just like, oh, this is some thing. So I thought that was really cool. And then the other sequence, I'll get back to you. My brain just kind of went away for a second.
Yeah, so I really love the whole like conversation they have, like the heart to heart thing that Indy's like basically like trying to get his dad to like regret, and he's like saying, you know, you weren't there, like you didn't show any interest in me. And I thought it was really interesting how you know, Connery's Henry Jones is kind of like, you know, well, you weren't interesting, and then when you became interesting, you left, and and then he does the whole like, well, I'm here now, like, what do you want to talk about? And he's like, I really have no idea. And he's like, so what are you complaining about? like let's get back to it. It's really interesting because it's, at first you're like, oh, he's just like being dismissive of, you know, his childhood, or but then like when you really keep watching the movie, you kind of realize like, well, like he is like connecting with him now, and I guess that's just how that character sees it. It's like, why are we gonna delve through all that? Like, let's do what we are doing now. We're connecting now. Let's
spend time in the moment now and not exactly.
But yeah, I just thought that was really interesting. Like, obviously, it's sort of just like kind of a funny thing, too. But yeah, really love that. I love like the 3 tests is so fun. The breath of God, the word of God, the path of God. That's great stuff.
And like how he mentions, you know, it's a leap of faith is what's gonna do it. And I think that was able to pay homage to an overall religiosity without like being too much. I guess Luke was able to kind of do his thing without going too much into it.
That's something in all of these is like they're very religious. You know, they have these religious motifs that kind of run through them, which is interesting. It's
for sure.
Yeah. Let's talk about characters.
Okay.
Actually,
real quick. The Let It Go part. I saw like on your note. I think because we talked about the silhouettes and like the ending thing. It always perplexed me when I watched it as a kid. So he literally sees her reaching down. Oh, I'm going to get it. And then not doing it. And then it almost like literally immediately recreates.
Right.
And I've always like, why is he doing it? Like then I was thinking, well, maybe he felt like he could grab it and whatnot. But then this time, like when I was watching, it's like, he's wanting to do it because he's reconnecting with his dad. And it's just so important to his dad. And he wants his dad to be able to like, this is how I'm reinterpreting it. You know, he wants his dad to be able to achieve that thing that he's always wanted, like not to get the dad's approval, but because he's reconnected with his dad and he wants to show his dad, hey, I love you. And this has been your dream. And really, you didn't even get to touch it because it was saving your life. And now that you're sent, you know, you can meet your thing. And he was doing it out of love. But then his dad was like, just let it go. And that was a really touching part. Whereas before, I was just really like, Indy, why are you being stupid? It's like almost like with the ring, like where he's like, oh, I need to have it. And it's like, no, it's not about that potentially. And I think that was a really cool sequence.
Yeah. I didn't think about it in that light, but I do now that you say that, like that is probably true. There it that see that sequence is like the culmination of, we can dive into a little bit that father-son relationship. That's like
Yeah.
that if that the movie kind of rises or falls on that, really. The father-son dynamic and that relationship, and what are they, that are they gonna reconcile? Are they
Right.
like good? One of the thing that I noticed was, so the whole movie he calls him Junior,
Yeah.
and when he's like trying to save him, that's the first time he calls him Indiana too. And
Oh.
that was one of the reasons why it was like so touching to me. Is like
Yeah.
he's like looking down, and he's trying to like save him, and he says like, Indiana, let it go. And
And he's not doing it in like a
yeah,
ordering voice. It's a father pleading with
it's
the son.
father.
Hey,
It's
yeah.
and it's caring, and it even like could be, going back to both the conversation that they had at the bar, and also like what you were talking about of like Indy's trying to get it because his dad always wanted, like he wants to please his dad and make his dad proud.
Yeah.
And it's almost like he's saying like, let it go, being like, let it go, like literally, like let go of trying to get the grail, but also like let go of the past. Like you don't have to like try to please me or make me proud. Like, and he says his name, which is for the first time that he goes by, which is another way of saying like, I see you. Like you don't have to do that. Like you don't have to hold on to those things. Like I see you right now for who you are, and like I'm, proud of you. And it's like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you go
so touching
theologically, and it's that's what Jesus does for. Hey, let go of the things that you pursuing these things is only going to bring you pain and death and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Let go and just trust me, and let's get out of here.
Yeah.
So there's so much good stuff. So good.
Yeah, and like that Henry is like kind of working toward that point, because when the tank crashes, he thinks he lost Indiana Jones. And
Yes.
he's like, I've lost him. I never told him anything. I wasn't ready, and 5 minutes would have been enough. And he comes back and they hug and stuff. But this is like the final like culmination of that, of like him, I don't know, just like they see each other finally, and they like they can let go of whatever happened in the past and move forward. And that propels into, Spielberg mentioned in the making of on this topic, like he mentioned how the movie doesn't end with some big action thing or some special effects. It ends with the father-son like meeting of the minds and hearts, and then they ride off together like into the sunset. And so it's like they're moving forward.
Right.
Yeah, and it's really, really cool. Characters.
Okay.
Young Indy. One of the only thing I wanted to talk about for Young Indy is just like the character building efficiency that Spielberg has.
It was so good.
And just like a 10-minute sequence, we've got his early vocation, his uniform with the leather jacket and whip. You've got the scar on his chin, which is fun. Harrison Ford actually has the scar, which I think he said he got in a car accident.
Interesting.
So not as exciting as a whip scar, but his weapon. You get this fear of snakes.
When he wasn't like right beforehand, he wasn't, because the snake falls on the big dude, and he's like, it's just a snake, and throws it aside.
Right.
But then we find out, okay, that's I would be afraid too.
That's frightening. Yeah. You get you even get like a couple of his mantras, like that belongs in a museum. What are you gonna do? I don't know. I'll figure it out. Those are kind of some classic Indiana Jones mantras.
Yeah.
You get even a taste of like his relationship with his father. I mean, just incredible like character building. And it's like stuff you already know about Indiana Jones, but it's just like this fun way of reminding you of all the things you know about Indiana Jones, and just great.
And like we talked about the horse jumping things, we got to see like, this is how he kind of grew and did all this stuff. And it didn't seem forced. It didn't seem we've already bought into this concept that they're on the thing. Oh, okay, so there's a lion tamer has the bullwhip.
Yep.
We're not too concerned that he knew how to do the bullwhip immediately and didn't hurt himself or others, because it's just like, it makes sense. And I think that was it did a really good job of kind of showing everything.
Yeah, for sure.
Also throwback to like the Boy Scouts back in the day.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, he's a Life Scout. This is great.
I think in like 88 or 89, Spielberg got like some sort of special like honor, like Eagle Scout honor thing, award that the Boy Scouts presented him with, which was really cool.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I will say that never in a million years did we ever do anything like that when I was in Scouts. We were not going around the mountains and stuff.
You're not going into the canyon country of Utah and exploring on horses.
No.
Yeah, that's too bad.
People may have done it, but that was not my experience with it.
Oh man. You had mentioned Donovan. You wanted to touch on something for Donovan.
Yeah, he was I really appreciate smart villains.
Yeah.
And he had that one scene, like, so first off, I had forgotten that he was a villain.
Yeah.
So he's going through there and I was like, oh, he's just a good, like, passing on information, doing this stuff. But there's that one scene, and I think it was Donovan who did it. It might have been the other Nazi guy. But where they have to make the decision, do we go for the map, which is in wherever, or do we go to get the book in Brazil? And so then you fast forward a little bit, and one of the bad guys, and I think it was Donovan, who was like, well, no, you obviously know this book obviously means something. You still need it because that's why you went to Berlin. And like, that's not something I thought about, but it makes sense. And I like having a clever villain that would do that.
Yeah. And he's also like, he's smart, and he's also like very menacing, like you really get that there at the very end. Like he's like, the dude gets his head chopped off and he's like, next, somebody else try.
Right.
And then like, he just like straight up shoots Henry, like not even a second thought about it,
Yeah. And that put a time clock on it, which was, because again, and that just shows how intelligent he was. Like, this is the only way I'm going to get Indiana Jones to do this. I need to do something that he cares about. I need to do something that would harm something that he would care about. And he didn't choose to do to shoot Elsa, which I think stereotypically could be done, but I think he was smart enough to do it. But he chose the dad because he knew he wasn't good. Because I don't think that Indy would have done what he did if it was for oh my gosh, the other two, his other two companions.
Oh yeah,
I think he would have only done it for the dad.
Schaller, yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And so I just think that was really smart and really clever.
Yeah.
And
in any Bond movie or any other Indiana Jones movie, it would have been Elsa getting shot.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was the dad. And I think even in there was like a panel interview of all like the Indy women at one point, and Alison Doody talked about how she was like jealous because that should have been her role, but Sean Connery was doing her role.
Wow.
Yeah. I love that.
The other thing, what's it called? They wait to kill the people. Like when he was in the car, he was like, it's like, okay, keep them alive because you never know if we might need them or whatever. And then as soon as he gets the notification, oh, we have the map, and then he's like, okay, now you can kill them. Go and kill them. And like, because he didn't do the classic like Bond thing of, well, Mr. Bond, you'll die eventually. Have a good day. And then he gets out, or the Batman villain or whatever. It was we're gonna go and tie up these loose ends because, and then he was smart. So there's this. I really appreciate smart and cleverly written bad guys who are like realistic, like without he wasn't just like evil for evil's sake.
Yeah.
He was, we're going to go through and figure this out.
Mm-hmm. Little
And
did you know, he's dealing with a man who somehow lucks into figuring his way out of stuff in every situation. Yeah,
and
which
his
is a great thing about Indy. He doesn't ever like, it's not like his like extreme intellect and intuition. It's always just like he lucks into stuff. I love it.
It's like, oh, this is, I guess so. And then when Donovan had the fancy cup, he's like, this is fit for the King of Kings.
Right.
Totally makes sense. Absolutely believable on there. Yeah. So I think that he was really good. And then, like you said about Indy, I think he's kind of that everyman character,
right?
Because it's like he gets into the mess, and now granted he has an inordinate amount of luck to be able to get out of these things that nobody else would. But especially in happening to find Nazis whose uniforms he can wear, with the exception of the one time in Raiders where he looked like a stripper.
Oh yeah.
But it's I think that's one of the really cool things about Indiana Jones and why he is so universally beloved. Is because he's not super powerful at everything. He makes mistakes. He pays for those mistakes. A lot of times we're getting punched in the face. And not all of his plans work. And that's part of the fun of things. So I think that goes back to George Lucas's his love with the monomyth.
Yeah. The
So
Joseph Campbell hero's journey, like,
we get
for
to
sure.
see that through.
Yeah, Ford was saying in an interview that I saw that the most important thing about the character was, and like why he like stands the test of time, is like both kind of his tenacity in that way that we've been talking about, and also like his pleasure in just seeing amazing things and solving mysteries. Like,
yes,
you just see like on his face, like when he's just like excited, like Indiana Jones gets excited at the same time we get excited,
right?
Which
like
no, go ahead.
Like in Raiders, when like he goes and he just like drops it, and he's like kind of waiting to see, and then we're all kind of waiting to see, and then like that type, and then when things start to fall, then he's that's one of the ones where we got to see him like look back, and he's so expressive with his eyes, like, oh, there's a giant rock,
right?
Or in this case with the anyway, there's a lot of different things, like especially with the tank, how like he's hanging there and he's like, okay, I'm good, and then he's like, oh god, no, I'm not good. And then things just, like one guy gets shot, and then the tank moves just in the right amount of time, and then he's like, but then at the end, when things are super sentimental, and he's like kind of looking over the rock face with everybody else, and he's just out of breath and beaten, and he's just and he's there. He's like, give me a chance to rest, and they're like, no, we gotta go, and he's like,
okay, and the hat blows in, of course,
yes, he needs the hat, which is
you gotta have the hat. Oh yeah,
that was fun.
Love it. The other thing I was thinking about was like when they're in the library and he's looking at the stained glass and he's seeing the numbers and he's like slowly putting together, you can see on his face. And I was doing the same thing. I was like thinking like, oh, the X, and remembering like the X marks the spot comment he made in the class, like X never marks the spot. And so I was remembering that line and putting it together at the same time he was. And so like the excitement of like solving the mystery, like you do that with Indiana Jones. And I think that's like one of the reasons why like you can still connect with Indiana Jones, because he's like gets excited along with you, and he's figuring it out like along with you as the audience, which is really fun.
And especially in this one, they take you a lot along the journey a little bit more.
Yeah,
where
for sure.
Raiders, he was the one figuring, I'm going to bring the dirt, and then it's kind of because they were kind of establishing.
This one is his dad's expertise more, so he's
and he's just kind of going along with it. And I'm so glad that they didn't just make him a Yoda character.
Yeah, for sure. I guess the other character we should touch on is Elsa in general. It's one of those things where, is Elsa just there as a catalyst to bring the father and son together? Like, is this kind of like product of the times? The woman is there to help the man realize himself, both for like father and son. And I don't know. It's one of those things where like, could the female characters have been written a little bit better and more like independent? And yes, but I do feel like this one she does feel like she has more agency than, especially, you know, the character in Temple of Doom is just like, she has no agency.
Scream
She
and
has,
just yell about some stuff.
Marion has some agency.
Yeah.
That she kind of like loses a little bit more and more as the film goes on, unfortunately.
Right.
But like this character feels more like she has a little bit more agency throughout the film. Like she's making decisions that aren't relying on the man, but at the same time, she is kind of like a plot point to kind of like bring father and son together. But at the end of the day, like this just isn't really about the women characters. You know, it's just one of those things where it's like, you know, maybe it could have been written in a way, you know, if this was written today, like you won't, I mean, you get what we got with Dial of Destiny. You get a female character that's like way more in control and way more like has way more agency. You just wouldn't really get a character like this in most movies today. But which I think in some ways is good, but you know,
in this one, so in Dial of Destiny, it takes place a lot further, like in the future. I think for her ending up being like a Nazi like agent or whatever the case is, I think it totally makes sense. They would have used her and her good looks, and she would have used that to get ahead, and they used her to get with Indy. Now that's a gripe that I have against it. I don't like the idea that Indy and his dad slept with the same girl. That was weird.
Yeah,
I wasn't a fan of that.
It's a weird like Oedipal thing going on there. Yeah,
and it's like you didn't have to get into that. It's okay, but for her to use her feminine wiles to get this, because she has so much agency. Almost it was more like a Scarlett Johansson, Black Widow type thing. Let me use my feminine wiles to get what I need so that I can to meet my goals. It wasn't that she was just being used to help them, but she had every reason to do it because she was a very dedicated and strong person, and she knew what she was doing. And I don't feel that she was used or anything. And I think she did have a lot of agency because she was the one that chose to turn over. And I think that was so.
Yeah, I think so. I think where the critique, because this would have been like probably a critique from some people at the time and probably still today, it's less on how she plays out as a character, like within the framework of the story, and more of like the writing of the character for the purpose that like she's written for. So like the term some would use would be like the Hitchcock blonde. And so like that, the idea of the Hitchcock blonde was Hitchcock loved, you know, a pretty blonde woman who had like, she was smart and she was strong. But a lot of times in those Hitchcock movies where you have that character, she is there to kind of help the male character like realize himself. Like if you think of Rear Window, like the female, like she's strong, she's smart. You're like, why is this guy is stupid? Why doesn't he marry this woman? But really at the end of the day, like she doesn't have any like character arc herself necessarily. She's just there as like a strong, pretty blonde woman to help the man realize himself, like to help him dive into his like. So it's more of like it's more of like the writing, and using the character to do that thing. And I think that's a fair critique. I just think it's not like that big of a deal for an Indiana Jones movie that like isn't really taking itself all that seriously anyway. So, you know,
I think if it wouldn't have been her, they could have easily have in this particular, like in Temple of Doom, it had like that one.
Yeah,
it really was more just that's just a woman there to be a random love and they have no chemistry or stuff like that. I think if they would have obviously taken out the romance aspect of it, but they could have easily have switched this with a male character,
right?
And
Sure,
so
yeah.
because of that, I think it's the assistant who was there to kind of lure in and to kind of lull us into a sense of false security. So I think they could have done that. So that's why I guess I'll give them a little bit more of a pass, because it wasn't like a woman in the fridge or girlfriend, wife in the fridge, whatever that trope is.
Yeah.
So I think that's what's spurring it on. I think this was so I'll give it a little bit more of a pass, but I think definitely more agency than a Bond girl. And I see what you're saying about the Hitchcock blonde, but I think she had a little more agency. Whereas in Rear Window, you definitely could not switch her out with another character. Sure. It had to be a woman in that role. Whereas I think you could do so. Yeah. But I think she played it.
That's a fair
well.
point. Yeah.
And even at the end, we saw that she was.
Yeah.
Well, even for her end, we saw that her oh my goodness, she cared about it too much, and that was her downfall.
Well, yeah, but Alison Doody did mention in an interview, like she actually did like how the character goes from like good to like just totally obsessed. In the end,
which I think is very interesting.
Yeah,
because maybe that was how she was justifying. This is a whole other thing. Maybe that's how she was justifying. Like she realized the Nazis are bad. Yeah, and she's like, if I had this, then maybe I can atone for some of the things. Maybe reading too much into. But I think the major part of her agency is when she uses what she had, that place that she had gotten, to get rid of Donovan.
Yeah.
By like, you can totally trust me now because I've been building this up, and then have this cup.
Turns on him. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I wrote down this. I've been listening. So I'll read Steven Spielberg, all the films. It's like a big kind of like compilation. It's up here, above me if you're watching. It's and I always I don't know if I mention this all the time, but I do put my like major reading resources in the episode notes at the bottom. So if you do want to like, oh, what was that book called? What was the author? I put those in the notes because I do pull a lot of like information from. I pull a lot of information from like the making of docs and stuff on the disc, but also like I have this book and then Steven Spielberg, A Life in Film by Molly Haskell. I pull a lot of stuff from that. I listened to that on audiobook. That's why I don't have it behind me. But I pulled this quote from her book. I thought it was really good on the note of characters. She said, quote, Spielberg's skill at humanizing his characters just enough to draw one in, primarily through the universal nexus of family and childhood, creates a felt reality in which the two-dimensional characters seem out of place. Spielberg's recognition of himself and his workaholic father represented a major shift in sympathy, and it was a theme that would play out in Hook too. So she's just kind of talking about how Spielberg is so good at humanizing his characters, drawing you in. You've got that universal thing that we talked about that he plays into. And then she applies it specifically to like you have a kid and a workaholic father that you see that also in like Hook play out there. And so just as like examples of how he does that. And it's like we were talking about earlier, like you see in the characters play out like Spielberg his movies as making movies as therapy, working out those things like just like that kind of stuff. The last thing I just wanted to mention was this, and this is something that I think just to kind of like give a shout out, I think it was Sean Fennessy that pointed out these relations on the Rewatchables podcast that I listened to. They have an episode on this that's good. But he was pointing out that there are a lot of parallels to the Fabelmans. And he was kind of saying that because of that, this really, like in hindsight, this seems like a core text for Spielberg, this movie. So he was pointing out that young Indy and the circus train is kind of like relates to Spielberg's first movie, The Greatest Show on Earth, being something that
it's a circus movie, and it's something that like was integral to him, pursuing movie making, was seeing that movie. And then you have this complex emotional relationship with an intellectual and withholding father, which you see play out in The Fabelmans as like, semi-autobiographical thing. And you see it play out here. We kind of talked about the weird Oedipal relationship with the mother that he had, and the father and son sleeping with the same woman is kind of like play on that. I don't know that was a because Spielberg actually didn't really want that in the movie.
Okay.
Which makes sense, but yeah, that it does play into that. And then they both end with a horizon shot, which is another parallel. So yeah, he just pointed out like, oh, this seems like in hindsight, this is like a core text for Spielberg. It relates to like his childhood story in The Fabelmans so much in these like connecting ways. I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. But yeah, just as a final thought, this is really like the end of an era, and a saga too, but the end of an era for Spielberg. I said in my notes I put the end of a saga for now, because we do return to Indy eventually. But yeah, it feels like this movie is really, we have one more movie in the 1980s, but this really does feel like kind of the exclamation points at the end of an era for Spielberg. It's you're wrapping up the 1980s, your first 15 years of Jaws came out in 75, so you have he did some TV stuff in the late 60s, early 70s, but Jaws was Sugarland Express was 74 or 73, so that was his first theatrical release. So you're not quite 2 decades into your career, but as a feature filmmaker. But yeah, it still just kind of feels like the end of an era. You have Spielberg talks about how these Indiana Jones movies, really he learned more from making those than like his more serious and personal films.
Wow.
And this movie feels like it's kind of like the halfway point. Like he's showing like, I'm not going to choose between action movies and serious, like I'm not going to choose between fun movies and serious movies. I'm going to do both now at the same time. And you see that here with the family drama is just as important as like all the fun action stuff in this movie. And the movie kind of rises or falls on that, even with all the fun stuff happening around it. Yeah, I mean, you kind of, he has like another like couple of like, you got Always and Hook that come out that are kind of like still in his weird period, but then you hit Jurassic Park, which is a fun movie, and then you hit Schindler's List and Jurassic Park in the same year.
Oh, geez.
So I mean, you've got the fun movie and the serious movie, and he's like, I'm not choosing anymore. I'm doing both. Like, and I'm going to do both really well. He's kind of learned from his mistakes in comedy and action stuff, and he's learned from his mistakes in like his like more serious drama stuff, and he's like really moving forward into a different phase of his career after this and the next couple of movies, really.
Right.
And I just think that's like just another reason that this movie is so important and vital and great, because it is that exclamation point. It's like, here's my final indie film. Obviously we know that wasn't technically true, but for all intents and purposes,
Crystal Skull.
He did Crystal Skull. He
did not do Dial of Destiny.
No.
Okay.
But he
that
did
was
do Crystal Skull.
Mangold.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. This is another reason to really appreciate and enjoy this movie.
I think it was great.
Yeah. It's my favorite indie movie as well. I know you mentioned that.
And because I think when you were originally, hey, here are some movies, I was like, I'd like to do this one. It's my favorite Indiana Jones one.
Yeah. Yeah, it is my favorite Indiana Jones movie. I just think the Connery Ford chemistry and how that storyline plays out to the movie, I find it very touching.
Yep.
And it adds that dramatic element to Indiana Jones that wasn't really there before. It made Indiana Jones not just like a completely outrageously fun movie, but also like touching, and emotionally impactful. And that's what was missing from Raiders for me, was like, it's fun and like perfectly shot and everything, but like I do weigh like emotional impact, and I love just a fun movie. I don't think every movie has to like say something profound or do something profound. But I do like weigh those movies with a higher to a higher degree that do like have some emotional impact, obviously. So I love this movie. It's just great. As my camera bounces bumps something.
I would say this is one of my top 10 films of all time.
That's awesome.
It's a really big thing, but it
So would you say it's your favorite Spielberg movie?
Oh, man.
This or Jurassic Park, I guess?
Yeah.
A tie?
It's kind of like the whole thing. Like I love Rogue One, but I wouldn't love Rogue One as much if I hadn't seen the original trilogy.
Sure, yeah.
And so it's kind of like that, where it's like I love so much about this, but then Jurassic Park had, I would say, even more of a profound impact on me as a child, seeing it in theaters like that. But this really has hit so many things from a technical point of like good movie making that I don't think that Jurassic Park was designed to try and hit.
Yeah,
because I don't. If the original trilogy was more like Rogue One, I don't know that I would love it as much, because Rogue One is it can be depressing.
Yeah.
Except for so it's kind of like in that sense. So, if I were to make a movie, it would probably be more along the lines of an Indiana Jones and Last Crusade than a Jurassic Park, even though it might have elements of both. But just that it would be, because I think that positive emotional impact is really good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But then you can't. Does that make sense? I guess.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
So
I'm tracking.
I would say that, but Jurassic Park's in my top 10 of all time movies too. So
there you go.
They're. But I
won't make you choose between the two.
There you go.
We'll just say they're both top 10.
They are top 10s.
Yeah, you're allowed to tie. That's okay.
Because it just, like I said, it hits everything so well. It's got the humor without going overboard in the humor. It's got the action. It's got the emotional impact. It's got a good story. It's got great pacing. It's got great. It does. Like if I were teaching a class on how to make a movie, this would be like my go-to for like, hey, here's what we need to do.
Sure. Yeah.
Write papers on this. And of course there are other movies that are really good too, but just in terms of like hey, here are components of a good movie. I think that's
right. Yeah.
Why you putting it as an exclamation point, I think it kind of that makes sense, because that's kind of at the end, like he's learned and gone through so much, and he's been able to experiment and find his stride of who he is. And once again, I really appreciate where you said about how he's not choosing one or the other.
Yeah.
He's choosing both. And I think that's what this shows, is that he can do both. And then we see later on that he does do both really well.
Yeah.
And he doesn't have to be typecast into, certain type of film. And I think we are better as movie lovers because of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I actually moved this from like a 8 out of 10 to a 9 out of 10 on this rewatch, because I just love it. It's great.
I think that's good. I think a 9 out of 10, if we say that the 10, like 10 is the absolute most perfect movie ever, I don't know that will ever exist, but I think
I have plenty of 10 out of 10 movies that I wouldn't say are perfect, because I don't think there's a such thing as a perfect movie. So but I really love this movie. I think we're good. Like I think we've hit the Last Crusade. We have we've passed the 3 tests. I think we've made it to the Grail. But now we can't leave the room if we want to stay immortal, unless you were more right about it than I was.
Who knows?
Yeah.
We'll just find out. If there's earthquakes when this releases,
Yeah.
we'll know what happens.
Yeah, exactly. You'll find out if you've chosen wisely or foolishly.
Oh,
There we go.
that
But
was a good
yeah,
part too.
that is that's all we have. Well, before we go, I want to give you make sure you have space to tell people where they can maybe follow you or see what you're up to. Is there a good spot to do that?
On X, you can follow me at Mr. at Mr. Funkhouser, or eventually, and maybe by the time this is released and whatever, I'll have Dancing Fox doing more, but at Dancing Fox Studio, or dancingfox.studio for just an actual web address. We'll hope to have stuff, and it's all about exploring stories and finding parallels in it. So
yeah.
And then eventually, when the podcast launches, then we'll have you on, and it'll be great.
Yeah.
Depending on if
fun.
You beat me in the draft, we'll kind of determine that way.
Yes. I'll make sure to link those in the episode description so that people don't have to remember. They can just go click it. So if you want to follow Christian, please go follow him. And be on the lookout for it's Fox Studio,
Dancing Fox,
and
Dancing
Fox Studio is the website. Yeah. Okay. Dancing Fox, be on the lookout for that. Maybe this will be releasing in August. So maybe by the time that rolls around,
hopefully it should be there. Yeah. By that time
it'll be around by then. So that'll be exciting.
Woo!
That's all we have. Next week, as Christian just alluded to, we're going to be doing a trilogies movie draft. So that's exciting. So be on the lookout for that next week. And then we'll be wrapping up the 80s with Always, talking about that the week after that. His last film of the 1980s. It's sad to have the early Spielberg series coming to a close, but be on the lookout for those things. I'm excited to do a movie trilogies draft with Christian next week. But that's all we have for this week. So I've been Eli Price for Christiaan Funkhouser. You have been listening to The Establishing Shot. We will see you next time.
We were happy here. For a little while.
But look, I figure it this way. Better to be king for a night than schmuck for a lifetime.